Chapter 9, Part 1 of The Mysteries of Paris, Volume 5, by Eugène Sue. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Lion's Den, Part 1. If the appearance of a house of confinement, constructed with every attention to salubrity and humanity, has nothing repulsive in its aspect, the sight of the prisoners causes a very different feeling. At the sight of the criminals who fill the jails, we are at first seized with a shudder of fear and horror. It is only after some reflection that this is overcome, and feelings of pity mixed with bitterness overcome us. To understand the feeling of horror and fear, our reader must follow us to the Fosse aux Lions, the Lion's Den, one of the yards in La Force so called. In this are usually placed the most dangerous criminals, whose ferocity or the charges against whom are most serious. At this time they had been compelled to place there in consequence of the alterations making in the prison many other prisoners. These, although equally under accusations and awaiting the assizes, were almost all respectable persons in comparison with the usual occupants of the Lion's Den. The sky, gloomy, grey, and rainy, cast a dull light over the scene we are about to depict, and which took place in the centre of the yard of considerable extent, square, and enclosed by high white walls, having here and there several grated windows. At one end of this yard was a narrow door with a wicket. At the other end, at the entrance to the day-room, a large apartment with a stove in the centre, surrounded by wooden benches, on which were sitting and lying several prisoners conversing together. Others, preferring exercise, were walking up and down the walks, 4 or 5 in a row, arm in arm. It requires the pencil of Salvator or Goya, in order to sketch the different specimens of physical and moral ugliness, to render in its hideous fantasy the variety of costumes worn by these men, for the most part covered with squalid rags, for being only accused, i.e., supposed innocent, they were not clad in the usual uniform of the central houses. Some, however, wore it, for on their entrance into jail their rags appeared so filthy and infected, that after the usual washing and bath they had the frock and trousers of coarse grey cloth, as worn by the criminals, assigned to them. A phrenologist would have observed attentively those embrowned and weather-beaten countenances, those flat or narrow foreheads, those cruel or crafty looks, the wicked or stupid mouth, the enormous neck. They nearly all presented frightful resemblances to brutes. In the cunning looks of one was seen the perfidious subtlety of the fox, in another was the sanguinary rapacity of the bird of prey, in a third the ferocity of a tiger, and in all the animal stupidity of the brute. We will sketch one or two of the most striking physiognomies in the Fosse aux Lions. Whilst the turnkey was watching his charge, a sort of council was being held in the day-room. Amongst the prisoners there assembled were Barbillon and Nicolas Martial. The prisoner who appeared to preside and lead in this debate was a scoundrel called the Skeleton, whose name has been often mentioned by the Martial family in the Ile du Ravageur. The Skeleton was prévôt, or captain, of the day-room. This fellow was tall and about 40 years of age, fully justifying his sinister nickname by a meagreness impossible to describe, but which might almost be termed osteologic. If the countenance of the Skeleton presented more or less analogy with that of the tiger, the vulture, or the fox, the shape of his forehead, receding as it did, his bony, flat, and lengthened jaws, supported by a neck of disproportioned length, instantly reminded you of the conformation of a serpent. Complete baldness increased still more this hideous resemblance, for beneath the corded skin of his forehead, nearly as flat as a reptile's, might be distinguished the smallest protuberances, the smallest sutures of his skull. His beardless face was exactly like old parchment tightly distended over the bones of his face, and only somewhat stretched from the projection of the cheek-bone to the angle of the lower jaw, the working of which was distinctly visible. His eyes, small and lowering, were so deeply embedded, and the rim of his brow so prominent, that under his yellow brow, when the light fell, were seen 2 orbits literally filled with shadows; and a little further on, the eyes seemed to disappear in the depths of these 2 dark cavities, these 2 black holes, which gave so sinister an aspect to the skeleton head. His long teeth, whose alveolar projections were to be accurately traced beneath the tanned skin of his bony and flat jaws, were almost continually developed by a habitual sneer. Although the stiffened muscles of this man were almost reduced to tendons, he possessed extraordinary strength, and the strongest resisted with difficulty the grasp of his long arms, his long and lean fingers. He had the formidable clutch of a skeleton of iron. He wore a blue smock frock, very short, and which exposed, and he was vain of it, his knotted hands and half his forearm, or rather 2 bones, the radius and the ulna. This anatomy will be excused us. 2 bones enveloped in a coarse and black skin, separated by a deep groove, in which were some veins hard and dry as cords. When he placed his hands on a table he seemed, as Pique Vinaigre justly remarked, as if he were spreading out a game of knuckle bones. The skeleton, after having passed 15 years of his life at the galleys for an attempt at robbery and murder, had broken his ban and been taken in the very act of theft and murder. The last assassination had been committed with circumstances of such ferocity that the ruffian made up his mind, and with reason, that he should be condemned to death. The influence which the skeleton exercised over the other prisoners, from his strength, energy, and wickedness, had caused him to be chosen by the director of the prison as prévôt of the dormitory, that is to say, the skeleton was charged with the police of the chamber as far as concerned its order, arrangement, and the cleanliness of the room and the beds, a duty which he discharged perfectly, and no prisoner dared to fail in the cares and duties which he superintended. The skeleton was discoursing with several prisoners, amongst whom were Barbillon and Nicolas Martial. "Are you sure of what you say?" inquired the skeleton of Martial. "Yes, 100 times yes. Father Micou heard it from the Gros Boiteux, who has already tried to knock this hound on the head because he peached about some one." "Then let's do for him, brush him up," said Barbillon. The skeleton was already inclined to give that skulking Germain a turn of his hand. The prévôt took his pipe from his mouth for a moment, and then said in a tone so low and husky as to be scarcely audible, "Germain kept aloof from us, gave himself airs, watched us. For the less one talks, the more one listens. We meant to get rid of him out of the Fosse aux Lions, and if we had given him a quiet squeeze, they'd have taken him away." "Well, then," inquired Nicholas, "what alteration need there be now?" "This alteration," replied the skeleton, "that if he has turned informer, as the Gros Boiteux declares, he mustn't get off with a quiet squeeze." "By no manner of means," said Barbillon. "We must make an example of him," continued the skeleton, warming as he went on. "It is not how the nabs who look out for us, but the noses. Jacques and Gauthier, who were guillotined the other day, were informed against, nosed. Roussillon sent to the galleys for life, nosed." "And me and my mother and Calabash, and my brother at Toulon," cried Nicholas, "have we not all been nosed by Bras Rouge?" "To be sure we have; because instead of shutting him up here with us, he has been sent to La Roquette. They daren't put him with us. He knew he had done us wrong, the old—" "Well," added Barbillon, "and didn't Bras Rouge nose upon me, too?" "And I, too," said a young prisoner, in a thin voice, and lisping affectedly. "I was split up by Jobert, who had proposed to me a little affair in the Rue Saint Martin." The latter personage, with a fluty voice, pale, fat, and effeminate face, and with a sly and treacherous glance, was singularly attired. He wore as a head dress a red pocket handkerchief, which exposed 2 locks of light brown hair close to his temples. The 2 ends of his handkerchief formed a projecting rosette over his forehead. His cravat was a merino shawl, with a large pattern, which crossed over his chest. His mulberry-coloured waistcoat almost disappeared beneath the tight waistband of a very large pair of trousers of plaid, with very large and different coloured checks. "And was it not shameful, such a man to turn against me?" he added in his shrill voice. "Yet really nothing in the world would have made me distrust Jobert." "I know very well that he sold you Javatte," replied the skeleton, who seemed to protect the prisoner peculiarly. "And as a proof that they have done for thy nose the same as they have done for Bras Rouge, they have not dared to leave Jobert here, but sent him to the stone jug of the Conciergerie. Well, there must be an end put to this. There must be an example; for traitors are doing the work of the police, and believe themselves safe in their skins because they are put in a different prison from those on whom they have nosed." That's true. To prevent this, every prisoner should consider every nose as his deadly enemy. Whether he informs against Peter or James, here or there, that's nothing. Fall on him tooth and nail. When we have made cold meat of 4 or 5 in the prisons, the others will think twice before they turn snitch." "You're right, Skeleton," said Nicholas, "and let Germain be number 1." "And no mistake," replied the prévôt. "But let us wait until the Gros Boiteux arrives. When, for instance, he has proved to all the world that Germain is a nose, the thing shall be settled out of hand. The calf shall bleat no more. We'll stop his wind."
"And what shall we do with the turnkeys who watch us?"
inquired the prisoner whom the Skeleton called Javatte.
"I have my plan, which Pique Vinaigre will aid." He's a coward."
"And no stronger than a flea."
"I'm awake. Where is he?"
"He had come out of the visiting room, but went back to see his lawyer."
"And is Germain still in the visiting room?"
"Yes, with the little wench who comes to see him."
"When he returns, be on your guard; but we must wait for Pique Vinaigre. Without him we can do nothing."
"No."
"No." "And Germain shall be done for."
"I'll take care of that."
"But with what? They have taken all our knives away."
"What do you think of these nippers? Would you like to have your neck in their clutch?" asked the Skeleton, opening his long, bony fingers, hard as iron.
"You'll choke him?"
"Decidedly."
"But if they find out that it is you?"
"Well, what if they do? Am I a calf with 2 heads, such as they show at the fair?"
"No, that's true. A man has but 1 throat, and yours—"
"Is sentenced. My lawyer told me so yesterday. I was taken with my hand in the bag and my knife in the weasand of the stiff'un. I'm a return horse, too. So nothing can be more certain. I'll drop my head into Charlot's, the headman's, basket, and I shall see if it's true that he does his customers, and puts sawdust into his basket instead of the bran which government allows us."
"True, the guillotine has a right to its bran. Now I remember my father was robbed in the same way," said Nicholas Martial, with a ferocious grin.
This horrid jest created immense laughter amongst the prisoners. This is fearful, but far from exaggeration. We give but a faint idea of these conversations, so common in prisons. The prisoners were all laughing joyously.
"Thousand thunders!" cried the Skeleton. "I wish they who punish us would come and see how we bear it. If they will come to the Barrière St. Jacques the day of my benefit, they will hear me address the audience in a neat and appropriate speech, and say to Charlot, in a gentlemanly tone, 'Père Sanson, the cord, if you please.'"
Note 1. To understand this horrid jest, the English reader must know that the doors in France are usually opened by the porter, who sits in his room and pulls a cord to allow the person going out to have free egress, and the blade of the guillotine glides down the grooves of the machine, after a spring has been set in motion, by touching a cord that acts upon it. Fresh bursts of laughter hailed this jest.
"And then Charlot opens the baker's,
the devil's, door," continued the Skeleton, still smoking his pipe.
"Ah, bah! Is there a devil?"
"You fool, I was only joking. There's a sharp blade, and they put a head under it, and that's all. And now that I know my road, and must stay at the Abbey of Montaregret (Guillotine), I would rather go there to day than to morrow," said the Skeleton, with savage excitement. "I wish I was there now. My blood comes into my mouth when I think what a crowd there'll be to see me. There'll be, at least, I should say, from 4,000 to 5,000 who will push and squeeze to get good places, and they'll hire seats and windows as for a grand procession. I hear 'em now crying, 'Seats to let! Seats to let!' And then there'll be troops of soldiers, cavalry and infantry, and all for me, for the Skeleton. That's enough to rouse a man if he was as big a coward as Pique Vinaigre, that would make you walk like a hero. All eyes on you, and that makes a fellow pluck up. Then, 'tis but a moment, a fellow dies game, and that annoys the big wigs and curs,
and gives the knowing one's pluck to face the chopper." "That's true on gospel," added Barbillon, trying to imitate the fearful audacity of the Skeleton. "They think to make us funky when they set Charlot to work to get his shop open at our expense." "Ah, bah!" said Nicholas in his turn. "We laugh at Charlot and his shop. It is like the prison or the galleys. We laugh at them too. And so, that we may be all friends together, let's be jolly as long as we can." "The thing that would do us," said the shrill-voiced prisoner, "would be to put us in solitary cells day and night. They do say they mean to do so at last." "In solitary cells!" exclaimed the Skeleton with repressed rage. "Don't talk of it! Solitary cell! Alone! Hold your tongue! I would rather have my arms and legs cut off. Alone within four walls! Quite alone, without having our pals to laugh with! Oh, that will never be! I like the galleys 100 times better than the central prison, because at the galleys, instead of being shut up, one is out of doors, sees the world, people going and coming, and has his jokes and fun. Well, I'd rather be done for at once than be put in a solitary cell, if only for a year. Yes, for at this moment I am sure to be guillotined, ain't I? Well, if they said to me, 'Would you rather have a year of solitary confinement?' I should hold out my neck. A year all alone? Why, is it possible? What do they suppose a man thinks of when he is alone?"
"Suppose you were carried there by main force?"
"Well, I wouldn't stay. I would make such use of my hands and feet that I should escape," replied the Skeleton.
"But if you couldn't, if you were unable to escape?"
"Then I'd kill the first person who came near me, in order to have my head chopped off."
"But if, instead of sentencing us to death, they condemned us to be in solitary confinement for life?"
The Skeleton appeared struck at this remark, and after a moment's silence replied: "Why, then, I'll tell you what I should do. I should dash out my brains against the walls. I would starve rather than be in a solitary cell. What! All alone? All my life alone with myself, and no chance of escape? I tell you it is impossible. Well, you know, there's no man more reckless than I am. I'd kill a man for $1, and for nothing if my honour was concerned. They believe I have only killed 2 persons, but if the dead could tell tales, there are 5 tongues could say what I have done." The ruffian was boasting. The sanguinary declarations are still another trait of the hardened criminals. A governor of a prison said to us, "If the assassinations boasted of by these scoundrels were really committed, the population would be decimated."
"And I, too,"
said Barbillon, desirous of bragging in his turn.
"They think I only silenced the husband of the milkwoman in the Cité, but I did many others with tall Robert, who suffered last year."
"I was going to say," continued the Skeleton, "that I fear neither fire nor devil. Well, if I were in a solitary cell, and certain I could not escape, thunder! I believe I should be frightened."
"And so, if you had to begin your time over again as prig and throttler, and if instead of central houses, galleys, and guillotine, there were only solitary cells, you would hesitate before such a chance?"
"Ma foi! I believe I really should," replied the Skeleton. And he said truly. It is impossible to describe the vast terror which such ruffians experience at the very idea of being in solitary confinement. And is not this very terror an eloquent plea in favour of this punishment? Chapter 9 Part 2 of The Mysteries of Paris, Volume 5, by Eugène Sue. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Lion's Den, Part 2. An uproarious noise made by the prisoners in the yard interrupted the Skeleton's counsel. Nicholas rose hastily, and went to the door of the room to discover the cause of this unusual tumult.
"It is the Gros Boiteux,"
said Nicholas, returning. The Gros Boiteux! Exclaimed the prévôt. And has Germain come down from the visiting room? Not yet, replied Barbillon. Then let him make haste, said the Skeleton, and I'll give him an order for a new coffin. The Gros Boiteux, whose arrival was so warmly hailed by the prisoners in the lion's den, and whose information might be so fatal to Germain, was a man of middle stature. But, in spite of being fat and crippled, he was nimble and vigorous. His countenance, brutal like that of most of his companions, was of the bulldog character. His low forehead, his small yellow eyes, his flaccid cheeks, his heavy jaws, the lower being very projecting and armed with long teeth, or rather broken fangs, which in places projected beyond his lips, made his resemblance to that animal the more striking. He wore a felt cap, and over his clothes a blue cloak with a fur collar. The Gros Boiteux was accompanied into the prison by a man about 30 years of age, whose tanned and freckled face appeared less dissolute than that of the other prisoners, although he affected to appear as dogged as his companion. From time to time his features became overcast, and he smiled bitterly. The Gros Boiteux soon found himself amongst his boon companions and acquaintances, and he could scarcely reply to the congratulations and kind words which came to him from all sides. "What, is it you, old boy? All right. Now we shall have some fun. You haven't hurried yourself." "Still, I have done all I could to see my friends again as soon as possible, and it was no fault of mine if the stone jug didn't claim me sooner." "Don't doubt you, old boy, and a man doesn't pick out a jail as his favourite residence; but once trapped he does his best to be jolly." "And so we shall be, for Pique Vinaigre is here." "Is he? What, one of the old customers of Melun? Why, that's capital, for he'll help us to pass the time with his stories, and his customers will not fail him, for there are more recruits coming in." "Who are they?" "Why, just now at the entrance, whilst I came in, I saw 2 fresh chaps brought in. One I didn't know, but the other, who wore a blue cotton cap and a grey blouse, I have seen before somewhere. He is a powerful looking man, and I think I have met him at the ogress's of the White Rabbit. I say, Gros Boiteux, don't you remember at Melun I bet you a wager that in less than a year you would be nabbed again?" "To be sure I do, and you've won. But what are you here for?" "Oh, I was caught on the prigging lay, à l'Américaine." "Ah, always in the same line." "Yes, I continue in my usual small way. The rig is common, but there are always culls, and but for the stupidity of a pal I should not be here. However, once caught, twice warned, and when I begin again I will be more careful. I have my plan." "Ah, here's Cardillac," said the Boiteux, going to a little man wretchedly dressed, with ill-looking aspect, full of craft and malignity, and with features partaking of the wolf and fox. "Ah, old chap, how are you?" "Ah, old limper," replied the prisoner nicknamed Cardillac to the Gros Boiteux. "They said every day, 'He's coming, he's not coming,' but you are like the pretty girls, you do as you like." "Yes, to be sure." "Well," replied Cardillac, "is it for something spicy that you are here now?" "Yes, my dear fellow, I had done 1 or 2 good things, but the last was a failure. It was an out-and-out go, and may still be done. Unfortunately, Frank and I overshot the mark." And the Gros Boiteux pointed to his companion, towards whom all eyes now turned. "Ah, so it is, it's Frank," said Cardillac. "I didn't know him again because of his beard. What, Frankie? Why, I thought you'd turned honest, and was at least mayor of your village." "I was an ass, and I've suffered for it," said Frank quickly. "But every sin has its repentance. I was good once, and now I'm a prig for the rest of my days. Let 'em look out when I get out." "What happened to you, Frank?" "What happens to every free convict who is donkey enough to think he can turn honest. Fate is just. When I left Melun I'd saved 900 and odd francs." "Yes, that's true," said the Gros Boiteux. "All his misfortunes have come from his keeping his savings, instead of spending 'em jolly when he left the jug. You see what repentance leads to." They sent me en surveillance to Etampes, replied Frank. Being a locksmith by trade, I went to a master in my line and said to him, I am a freed convict. I know no one likes to employ such. But here are 900 francs of my savings. Give me work. My money will be your guarantee, for I want to work and be honest. What a joke! Well, you'll see how it answered. I offered my savings as a guarantee to the master locksmith that he might give me work. I'm not a banker to take money on interest, says he to me, and I don't want any freed convicts in my shop. I go to work in houses to open doors where keys are lost. I have a confidential business, and if it were known that I employed a freed convict amongst my workmen, I should lose my customers. Good day, my man. Wasn't that just what he deserved, Cardillac? Exactly. You simpleton, said the Gros Boiteux to Frank, with a paternal air. Instead of breaking your ban at once, and coming to Paris to melt your mopuses, so that you might not have a sou left, but be compelled to return to robbing. You see the end of your fine ideas. That's what you're always saying, said Frank with impatience. It is true I was wrong not to spend my tin, for I have not even enjoyed it. Well, as there were only 4 locksmiths in Etampes, he whom I had first addressed had soon told all the others, and they said to me as had said their fellow tradesmen, No, thank ye. All sung the same song. Only see now what it all comes to. You must see that we are all marked for life. Well, then, I was on the idle of Etampes, and my money melted and melted, continued Frank, but no work came. I left Etampes in spite of my surveillance and came to Paris, where I found work immediately, for my employer did not know who or what I was, and it's no boast to say I am a first-rate workman. Well, I put my 700 francs which I had remaining into an agent's hands, who gave me a note for it. When that was due he did not pay me, so I took my note to a huissier, who brought an action against him and recovered the money, which I left in his hands, saying to myself there's something for a rainy day. Well, just then I met the Gros Boiteux. True. Well, Frank was a locksmith and made keys. I had a job in which he could be of service, and I proposed it to him. I had the prints, and he had only to go to work, when only imagine he refused. He meant to turn honest. So, says I, I'll arrange about that. I'll make him work for his own interest. So I wrote a letter, without any signature, to his master, and another to his fellow workmen, to inform them that Frank was a liberated convict. So the master turned him away. He went to another employer and worked there for a week. Same game again, and if he had gone to a dozen I'd have served him in the same way. And if I had suspected that it was you who had informed against me, answered Frank, I'd have given you a pleasant quarter of an hour to pass. Well, I was at length driven away from my last employer as a scamp only fit to be hanged. Work, then, be respectable, so that people may say not, What are you doing? But what have you done? Once on the pavé, I said, Fortunately I have my savings to fall back upon. So I went to the huissier, but he had cut his stick and spent my tin, and here was I without a feather to fly with, not even enough to pay for a week's lodging. What a precious rage I was in! Well, at this moment comes the Gros Boiteux, and he took advantage of my situation. I saw it was useless trying to be honest, and that once on the prig there's no leaving it. But, old Gros, I owe you a turn. Come, Frank, no malice, replied the Gros Boiteux. Well, he did his part like a man, and we entered upon the business, which promised royally. But unfortunately, at the moment when we opened our mouths to swallow the dainty bit, the traps were down upon us. Couldn't be helped, you know, lad. If it wasn't for that, why, our profession would be too good. Yet if that vagabond of a huissier had not robbed me, I should not have been here, said Frank with concentrated rage. Well, well, continued the Gros Boiteux, do you mean to say that you were better off when you were breaking your back with work? I was free, retorted Frank. Yes, on Sundays and when you were out of work, but the rest of the week you were tied up like a dog, and never sure of employ, Why, you don't know when you are well off." "Will you teach me?" said Frank bitterly. "Well, you've a right to be vexed, for it was shameful to miss such a good stroke. But it is still to be done in a month or two. The people will become reassured, and it is a rich, very rich house. I shall be sentenced for breaking my ban, and so cannot resume the job, but if I find an amateur I will hand it over to him a bargain. My woman has the prints, and there is nothing to do but make new keys, and with the information I can give it must succeed. Why, there must be at least 400 livres to lay hands on, and that ought to console you, Frank." Frank shook his head, crossed his hands over his chest, and made no reply. Cardillac took the Gros Boiteux by the arms, led him into a corner of the yard, and said to him, after a moment's silence, "Is the affair you have failed in still good?" "In 2 months as good as new." "Can you prove it?" "Of course." "And what do you ask for it?" 100 francs as earnest, and I will give you the word arranged with my woman, on which she will hand you the prints, from which you can make the false keys. And, moreover, if the thing comes off, I shall expect a 5th share of the swag to be handed over to my woman." "That's not unreasonable." "As I shall know to whom she has given the prints, if I am done out of my share I shall know whom to inform against." "And very right, too, if you were choused. But amongst prigs and cracksmen there's honour. We must rely on each other, or all business would be impossible." Another anomaly in this horrid existence. This villain spoke the truth. It is very seldom that thieves fail in their faith in such arrangements as these, but they usually act with a kind of good faith. Or rather, that we may not prostitute the word, we will say that necessity compels these ruffians to keep their words; for if they failed, as the companion of the Gros Boiteux said, all business would be impossible. A great number of robberies are arranged, bought, and plotted in this way in jail. Another pernicious result of confinement in common. "If what you say is sure," continued Cardillac, "I can agree for the job. There are no proofs against me. I am sure to be acquitted, and in a fortnight I shall be out. Let us add 3 weeks in order to turn oneself about, to get the false keys, and lay our plans, and then in 6 weeks from this, you'll go to the job in the very nick of time." "Well, then, it's a bargain." "But how about the earnest? I must have something down." "Here is my last button, and when I have no more, yet there are others left," said Cardillac, tearing off a button covered with cloth from his ragged blue coat, and then tearing off the covering with his nails, he showed the Gros Boiteux that, instead of a button mould, it contained a piece of 40 francs. "You see, I can pay deposit," he added, "when the affair is arranged." "That's the ticket, old fellow," said the Gros Boiteux. "And as you are soon going out and have got rhino to work with, I can put you up to another thing. A real good go, the cheese, a regular affair which my woman and myself have been cooking up, and which only wants the finishing stroke. Only imagine a lone street in a deserted quarter, a ground floor, looking on one side into an obscure alley, and on the other a garden, and here 2 old people, who go to roost with the cocks and hens since the riots, and, for fear of being robbed, they have concealed behind a panel, in a pot of preserves, a quantity of gold. My woman found it out by gossiping with the servant. But I tell you this will be a dearer job than t'other, for it is in hard cash, and all cooked ready to eat and drink." "We'll arrange it, be assured. But you haven't worked over well since you left the Central." "Yes, I have had a pretty fair chance. I got together some trifles which brought me nearly 60 pounds. One of my best bites was a pull at 2 women who lodged in the same house with me in the Passage de la Brasserie." "What, at Daddy Micou's?" "Yes." "And your Josephine?" "Just the same, a real ferret as ever. She cooks with the old couple I have mentioned to you, and so smelt out the pot with the golden honey in it." "She's nothing but a trump." "I flatter myself she is. But talking of trumps, you know the Chouette?" "Yes. Nicholas has told me the Schoolmaster did for her, and he has gone mad." "Perhaps from losing his sight through some accident. But I say, old fellow, It's quite understood that you will buy my 2 bargains, and so I shall not speak to any one else. Don't, and we will talk them over this evening. Well, and how are you getting on here? Oh, we laugh and play the fool. Who's prévôt of the chamber? The Skeleton. He's not to be joked with. I have seen him at Martial's in the Ile du Ravageur. We had a flare-up with Josephine and La Boulotte. By the way, Nicolas is here. So Micou told me when he made a lament that Nicolas was putting the screw on, an old hunks. Why, what else were receivers made for? Here is the Skeleton, said Cardillac, as the prévôt appeared at the door of the room. Young'un, come forward, said the Skeleton to the Gros Boiteux. Here I am, he replied, going into the apartment, accompanied by Frank, whose arm he held. During the conversation between the Gros Boiteux, Frank, and Cardillac, Barbillon had been, by order of the prévôt, to select 12 or 15 of the choicest prisoners, who, in order to avoid the suspicions of the turnkey, had come separately into the day-room. The other détenus had remained in the yard, and some of them, by Barbillon's advice, had appeared to be disputing, in order to take off the attention of the turnkey from the room in which were now assembled the Skeleton, Barbillon, Nicolas, Frank, Cardillac, the Gros Boiteux, and some 15 other prisoners, all awaiting with impatient curiosity until the prévôt should open the business. Barbillon, charged with the lookout, placed himself near the door. The Skeleton, taking his pipe from his mouth, said to the Gros Boiteux, Do you know a slim young man named Germain, with blue eyes, brown hair, and the look of a noodle? What? Is Germain here? Inquired the Gros Boiteux, with surprise, hate, and anger in his looks. What then, you know him? Said the Skeleton. Know him? Replied the Gros Boiteux. Why, my lads, I denounce him as a nose, and he must be punished. Yes, yes, replied the prisoners. Are you sure it was he who informed against you? Asked Frank. Suppose it was a mistake. We mustn't ill-use a man who's innocent. This remark was displeasing to the Skeleton, who leaned over to Gros Boiteux and said in his ear, Who is this man? One with whom I have worked. Are you sure? Yes, but he hasn't gall enough. Too much trickle in him. Good, I'll keep an eye on him. Tell us how Germain turned nose, said a prisoner. Yes, let us know all about it, Gros Boiteux, continued the Skeleton, who did not take his eyes off Frank. Well, then, said Gros Boiteux, a man of Nantes named Velu, a freed convict, brought up the young fellow, whose birth no one is acquainted with. When he had reached the proper age, they put him into a banking-house at Nantes, thinking they had put a wolf to watch the money-box, and make use of Germain to do a bold and great stroke, which had been meditated for a very long time. There were to be 2 coups, a forgery and a dip into the strong chest at the bank, something like 150,000 francs. All was arranged, and the Velu relied on the young fellow as on himself, for the chap slept in the room in which the iron safe was. Velu told him his plans. Germain neither says yes or no, but reveals all to his employer, and the very same evening cuts his stick and mizzles to Paris. The prisoners burst into various murmurs of indignation and threats. He's a spy, nose, informer, and we'll have the bones out of his body. If it's agreeable, I'll seek a quarrel with him, and settle his hash. Silence in the stone jug, exclaimed the Skeleton in a tone of command. The prisoners were silent. Go on, said the prévôt to Gros Boiteux, and he went on smoking. Believing that Germain had consented, and relying on his assistance, Velu and 2 of his friends attempted the job that same night. The banker was on the watch. One of Velu's friends was taken as he was entering a window, he himself escaping with difficulty. He reached Paris enraged at having been sold by Germain and foiled in a splendid affair. One fine day he met the young fellow. It was in the open daylight, and he didn't dare do anything, but he followed him, found out where he lived, and one night we 2, Velu and little Ledru, fell on Germain. Unfortunately he escaped, and then changed his residence in the Rue du Temple, where he lived. We were unable to find him afterwards. But if he is here, I demand—" "You have nothing to demand," said the Skeleton, in a tone of authority.
The Gros Boiteux was instantly silent.
"I take the bargain off your hands. You will concede to me Germain's skin, and I'll flay him alive. I am not called the Skeleton for nothing. I am dead alive, my grave is dug, and I run no risk in working for the Stone Jug. The informers destroy us faster than the police. They put noses of La Force into La Roquette, and the noses of La Roquette in the Conciergerie, and they think themselves safe. Now, mind you, when each prison shall have killed its informer, no matter when he may have informed, that will take away the other's appetite. I will set the example, and let others follow it."
All the prisoners, admiring the Skeleton's resolution, closed around him. Barbillon himself, instead of remaining near the door, joined the group, and did not perceive another prisoner who had entered the room. This individual, clothed in a gray blouse, and wearing a blue cotton cap with a red worsted border, pulled down over his eyes, started as he heard the name of Germain mentioned, and then, mingling with the Skeleton's admirers, gave out loud tones of approbation at the deadly determination of the prévôt.
"What an out-and-outer the Skeleton is!" said one. "The devil himself is a fool to him." "This here's what I call a man. If all were like him, wouldn't the flats be afeard? He'll do a real service to the Stone Jug, and when they see this, the noses will look blue. And no mistake. And since the Skeleton is safe to suffer, why, it'll cost him nothing to put a nose out of joint."
"Well, I think it's too bad," said Frank, "to kill the young chap."
Why?" exclaimed the Skeleton in a savage tone. "No one has a right to protect a traitor."
"Yes, to be sure, he is a traitor, so much the worse for him," said Frank, after a moment's reflection. These latter words and Gros Boiteux's assurance put the doubts which the other prisoners had entertained against Frank to rest. The Skeleton alone continued to mistrust him. "And what are we to do with the turnkey? Tell us, Dead Alive, for that is your name as well as the Skeleton," said Nicholas, with a grin.
"We must draw off his attention somehow."
"No, we'll hold him down by main force."
"Yes."
"No."
"Silence in the Stone Jug," said the Skeleton.
There was complete silence.
"Listen to me," said the prévôt in his hoarse voice. "There is no means of doing the thing so long as the turnkey remains in the day room or the walking yard. I have no knife, and there must be a few groans, for the sneak will struggle." "Well, what then?" "Why, this. Pique Vinaigre has promised to tell us to day after dinner his story of Gringalet and Cut in Half. It rains, and we shall all come here, and the sneak will come and sit down there in the corner, as he always does. We'll give Pique Vinaigre some sous that he may begin his tale. It will be dinner time in the gaol. The turnkey will see us quietly employed in listening to the miraculous mystery of Gringalet and Cut in Half, and will, suspecting no harm, make off to the tap. As soon as he has left the yard, we shall have a quarter of an hour to ourselves, and the nose will be cold meat before the turnkey can return. I will undertake it. I who have done for stouter fellows in my day. In mine, I'll have no assistance."
"Mind your eye!" cried Cardillac. "And what about the huissier who will always come for a gossip amongst us at dinner time? If he comes into the room to listen to Pique Vinaigre, and sees Germain done for, he will cry out for help. He's not one of us, the huissier. He's in a private cell, and we should mistrust him." "Is there a huissier here?" said Frank, the victim, as we know, of a breach of trust by Maître Boulard. "Is there a huissier here?" he repeated with astonishment. "And what is his name?" "Boulard," replied Cardillac. "The very man, the identical villain!" cried Frank, clenching his fist. "It is he who has stolen my savings." "The huissier?" inquired the prévôt. "Yes, 700 francs of mine." "You know him? And has he seen you?" inquired the Skeleton. "I have seen him, worse luck! But for him I should not be here." These regrets sounded ill in the Skeleton's ears, and he fixed his malignant eyes steadfastly on Frank, who replied to several of his comrade's questions. Then, stooping towards the Gros Boiteux, he said in a low voice, "This is a fresh 'un who might tell the turnkey." "No, I'll answer for his not informing against any one. Yet still he has his scruples about going the whole hog, and he might aid Germain in defending himself. It would be best to get him out of the yard." "I'll do it," said the Skeleton, and then aloud he said, "I say, Frank, won't you pitch into this thief of a lawyer?" "Won't I, that's all?" "Well, he's coming, and so look out." "I'm ready, and he shall bear my marks." "We shall have a row, and they will send the huissier to his room and Frank to the Black Hole," said the Skeleton in an undertone to the Gros Boiteux. "We shall thus get rid of both." "What a lucky pitch! Why, this Skeleton is a prime minister," said the Boiteux admiringly. And then he added in a loud tone, "I say, shall we tell Pique Vinaigre that we shall avail ourselves of his history to come over the turnkey and throttle the sneak?" "By no means. Pique Vinaigre is too soft and too cowardly. If he was up to the thing he wouldn't tell the story, but when the job is done and over he'll bear his share." The dinner bell sounded at this moment. "To your puddings, dogs," said the Skeleton. "Pique Vinaigre and Germain will soon be in the yard. Now mind your eyes, boys. They call me dead alive, but the sneak is also dead alive." End of Chapter 9. Read by Céline Major. Chapter 10 of The Mysteries of Paris, Volume 5, by Eugène Sue. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Storyteller. The new prisoner of whom we have spoken, and who was dressed in a grey blouse, with a cotton cap on his head, had attentively listened to and energetically applauded the scheme for punishing the reserve of Germain, even at the expense of his life. This individual, whose form betokened strength and power of no ordinary description, quitted the day room with the rest of the prisoners without being noticed, and soon mingled with the different groups assembled in the courtyard to receive their rations, crowding around the persons employed in the distribution like so many hungry cormorants. Each prisoner received a piece of the meat employed in making the day's soup, with about half a loaf of tolerably good bread. Such of the détenus as possessed the means were allowed to purchase drink at the wine shop belonging to the prison, and even to go thither to regale themselves with their lush, while persons who, like Nicholas, had received provisions from their friends, generally made a sort of feast, to which they invited their most intimate acquaintances. The guests selected by the son of the executed felon upon the present occasion were the Skeleton, Barbillon, and, at the suggestion of the latter, Pique Vinaigre, in order that good eating and drinking might quicken his talent for story-telling. The ham, hard-boiled eggs, cheese, and delicate white bread, wrung from the forced generosity of Micou the receiver, were arranged most temptingly on a bench in the day-room, and the Skeleton prepared himself to do ample justice to the repast, without in the slightest degree disturbing his appetite by the thoughts of the cold-blooded murder that was to follow it. "Just go and see whether Pique Vinaigre is coming, will you, my fine fellow?" cried he, addressing an individual who stood near him. "I tell you what it is, while I'm waiting to choke that stuck-up young fool they call Germain, I'm blowed if hunger and thirst won't choke me, if I have to dawdle about much longer. And here, don't forget to work old Frank up to do for the bum bailiff, so that we may kill two birds with one stone, as the saying is." "Don't you be afraid, old Dead Alive. If Frank don't make a stiff'un of the Bailey, it won't be our fault, that you may take your oath of." And while uttering these words, Nicholas went forth from the day-room. At this moment Maître Boulard entered the yard, smoking a cigar, his hands buried in the pockets of his grey duffle dressing-gown, his peaked cap pulled down well over his ears, and a look of chuckling satisfaction upon his fat, full-blown countenance. He quickly espied Nicholas, who was busily occupied gazing around in search of Frank. That person was at that precise period of time busily occupied, in company with his friend Gros Boiteux, in eating his dinner, and from the position in which they sat on one of the benches, they perceived not the presence of the bailiff. Acting in implicit obedience of the directions given him by the Skeleton, directly Nicholas, from the corner of his eye, descried the approach of Maître Boulard, he feigned entire ignorance of his vicinity, but made for the place where Frank and his companions were seated.
How are you, my ticket? Inquired the bailiff of Nicholas.
Bless me, answered he, I declare I didn't see you. I suppose you're like me, come out to take a sniff of fresh air and have your daily walk?
Why, that's about it.
But I happen to have more reasons than one to-day, and I tell you how it is. But first of all, catch hold of one of these cigars. They're deuced good ones. Come, don't be so missy and shy about it. Take as many as you like. Hang it all, when men are shut up together in a place like this, they oughtn't to be stingy. You are very good, and so are your cigars, but you were saying you had several reasons for walking out to-day.
Well, and so I have. First and foremost, I don't feel as hungry as usual. So, thinks I'll go and look on while those chaps eat their dinner. Who knows but the sight of their jaws all working away together may screw me up a bit, and give me a relish against feeding time?
A famous idea, said Nicholas. But if you really want to see a couple of feeders, just draw this way. There, added he, pointing to the bench on which Frank was sitting. What do you think of a pair of grubbers like those? I should say we were better behind than before them, or they might even swallow us instead of those huge lumps of bread and cheese and onions so rapidly stowed away in their capacious jaws.
Let's have a look at them, said Maître Boulard.
Well, to be sure, cried Nicholas with feigned surprise. I declare one of them is Gros Boiteux. Gros Boiteux and Frank both turned around at these words. Stupefied and speechless, the bailiff continued to gaze in utter amazement at the man he had so wronged, while, starting up with a sudden spring, Frank threw down the morsel he had been eating, and darting on Maître Boulard, he seized him by the throat, exclaiming, My money! My money! Give me my money!
Hello! Who are you? What do you mean? Hands off, or you'll strangle me!
My money, I say!
My good man, only calm yourself and listen to reason.
No, not till you give me back my money. What, aren't you satisfied with having brought me here? Can you not restore me what you stole from me?
But never.
I tell you again, if I get sent to the galleys 'tis all along of you, for had you not taken my little all from me, I should not have been driven to the necessity of robbing others. I might have lived and died an honest man. You may be acquitted, you may escape the punishment you deserve, but at least you shall carry my marks away with you. Ha, ha! You can come it grand and swagger about here dressed up with your gold chains and trinkets, bought, no doubt, with the money of other poor devils who have been cheated by you as I have been. Take that for your pains, and that, and that. Now, have you had enough? No? Then here's for you again.
Help! Help! Screamed the bailiff, as he rolled on the ground at Frank's feet, while his infuriated antagonist continued to belabour him with all his force. The rest of the prisoners took little or no interest in this affray, but contented themselves with forming a circle around the two combatants, or rather the assailant and the assailed. For Maître Boulard, frightened and out of breath, made not the slightest resistance, but contented himself with warding off his adversary's blows as well as he could. Fortunately, the repeated cries of the poor maltreated bailiff reached the ears of one of the superintending officers, by whose intervention he was rescued from the rough hands of Frank. Pale, terrified, and almost speechless with terror, Maître Boulard arose. One eye was wholly closed by the severe beating he had received, and without giving himself time to pick up his cap, he wildly cried, as he rushed towards the officer, "Open the door! Let me out! Let me out! I can't and I won't stay here another minute! Help here! Help! Help!" "As for you," exclaimed the officer, grasping Frank by the collar, "do you come along with me before the governor? I know you'll catch it, too, for fighting. 2 days in the black hole is the very least you'll get, I promise you." "I've paid him off, at any rate," returned Frank, "and I don't care for the rest." "I say," whispered Gros Boiteux, while affecting to be merely helping to arrange his dress, "I say, you won't breathe a word of what's going to happen to the sneak, of course." "Oh, don't be afraid. 'Tis just likely, had I been by, I might have stood up in his defence, because to kill a man in that manner is hard, at least, and for such a trifle. But as for telling of it, or betraying you all, oh, no." "Now then," called out the officer, I say, are you coming or are you not?"
"That's all right," said Nicholas. "We've got well rid of Frank and the bailiff. Now let's go to work without further loss of time upon the sneak." As Frank was being led from the prison yard, Germain and Pique Vinaigre entered it. It was scarcely possible to recognise Germain, for his hitherto melancholy and dejected countenance was radiant with joy and exulting happiness. He walked proudly erect, casting around him a look of certain and assured content. He knew himself to be beloved, and with that consciousness all the horrors of his prison seemed to disappear. Pique Vinaigre followed him with a timid, confused air, and after much hesitation, at length plucked up sufficient courage to venture to address Germain, whose arm he gently touched, ere the intended victim had reached the group of prisoners, who, from a distance, were examining him with looks of deadly hatred. Spite of himself, Germain shuddered at thus being brought into contact with a person of Pique Vinaigre's appearance, whose wretched person and ragged attire were ill calculated to impress any one with a favourable opinion of him. But, recollecting the earnest advice of Rigolette, and feeling altogether too happy himself to act with any want of benevolence, Germain stopped, and said to Pique Vinaigre, in a gentle tone of voice: "What do you want with me, my friend?" "I want to thank you." "For what?" "For the kindness shown to my sister by the pretty young woman who visited you to day." "I really do not understand you," said Germain, much surprised. "Well, then, I'll try and make you. Just now, when I was in the lodge of the prison, I saw the man who was on duty in the visitors' room a little while ago." "Ah, yes, a very good-hearted sort of man, too. I recollect him well." "It is not often you can apply that term to the gaolers of a prison, but the man I mean, Roussel is his name, is really deserving of being styled a kind, good-hearted man. So all of a sudden he whispers in my ear, 'I say, Pique Vinaigre, my lad,' he says, 'do you know M. Germain?' 'Yes,' says I do,' says I. 'He's the bête noire of the prison yard.' Then, suddenly interrupting himself, Pique Vinaigre said to Germain, 'I beg your pardon for calling you a bête noire. Don't think anything of that, but listen to the end of my story.' 'Oh, I'm listening. Go on.' 'Yes,' says I know who you mean very well,' says I. 'You mean M. Germain, the bête noire of the prison yard.' 'And of you, too, I suppose,' said the officer, in a severe and serious manner. 'Oh, bless you,' says I am too good-natured, as well as too much of a coward, to venture to call any one disagreeable; and less M. Germain than any one else,' says I, 'for I don't see any harm in him, and other folks appear to me very cruel and unjust towards him.' 'That's all right, then,' answers the officer, 'and I can tell you that you are bound to side with M. Germain, for he has been very kind to you,' he says. 'To me?' says I. 'How do you mean?' 'Well,' he answers, 'I don't mean M. Germain exactly, and it ain't to you altogether he's been kind; but still, for all that,' says Roussel, 'you are bound to show him your gratitude.'" "Try," said Germain, smilingly, "and make me understand what it is you do mean." "That's precisely what I said to the officer. 'Speak more clearly,' I says. So then he makes an answer, 'Why, it was not M. Germain, but the very pretty young person that was here just now to see him, who loaded your sister with all sorts of kindnesses. She overheard the poor thing telling you all her troubles, and directly as the creature went out, the charming young woman has come visiting to M. Germain went and offered to serve her in every way she could.'" "Dear, good Rigolette!" murmured Germain, deeply affected by this little incident. "She said not one word to me of all this." "Well, to be sure," I says to the officer, "what a poor stupid goose I am!" "You are quite right, you are. M. Germain, leastways, his friend, has been good to me, that is to say, to my sister Jeanne, which is the same thing, only much more than if the favour had been done to myself." "Poor dear Rigolette!" said Germain, "ever the same tender, compassionate, generous-hearted creature." So then the officer goes on to say how he heard all that passed between your nice young woman and my poor sister Jeanne. And now, he says, Pique Vinaigre, that you are aware of the fact, if you don't try to show kindness by every means in your power to M. Germain, and more especially, if you should know of any plot got up against him and not warn him of it, why, he says, Pique Vinaigre, you would be a regular scamp and a blackguard. I tell you what, I makes answer and says, I'm an unfinished scamp as yet, but I'm no blackguard,
and what's more, I never will be worse than I am, for the sake of my poor dear Jeanne and her children. And so, because M. Germain's friend has taken notice of my Jeanne, who is one of the best and worthiest creatures that ever lived, I may venture to boast of my sister, though I am ashamed of myself, but for that reason I will do all in my power to save or serve M. Germain. Unfortunately, I can do but little, after all. Never mind, do your best, that is all I ask of you. But I will give you the pleasure of being the pleasing bearer of news to M. Germain, which, indeed, I have only just learned myself. What is it? Inquired Germain. That to-morrow morning there will be a vacant chamber you can have for paying for, then you will be all by yourself. The officer desired me to tell you so. Indeed, exclaimed Germain, how truly glad I am to hear it. That worthy man was right in saying you would be the bearer of pleasant news. Well, I do think so myself, for it is quite easy to perceive that you do not feel comfortable among such poor wretches as we are. Then suddenly breaking off, Pique Vinaigre hastily added in a low whisper while feigning to stoop, as though searching for something he had dropped, Hark ye, M. Germain, the prisoners are all looking at us, wondering what we are talking about. I must go. But be on your guard, and if any one tries to quarrel with you, don't make any answer. They want a pretext for all attacking you at once. Barbillon is the one chosen to provoke you, so take especial care of him. I will try and turn the attention of the others from being directed towards you in a spiteful manner. And with these words, Pique Vinaigre rose up from his stooping position with the air of one who had found the object of his search. Thanks, my good fellow, said Germain eagerly as he separated from his companion. Rely on my prudence. Only that morning, aware of the plot against Germain, which, as far as he knew, consisted merely in an intention of involving him in some affray which should compel the governor of the prison to remove him to some other yard in the building, Pique Vinaigre was not only ignorant of the murderous designs so recently projected by the Skeleton, but equally so that the conspirators intended to avail themselves of his recital of Gringalet and Cut in Half, to deceive the vigilance of the officer on duty, as well as to beguile his attention from what was going on. Come on, old make-believe, said Nicholas to Pique Vinaigre as he advanced to meet him. Throw away that lump of dog's meat you have got in your hand. We have got a regular feast among us, and you are invited to it. A feast? La, how nice! What, out of the Panier Fleuri, or the Petit Ramponneau? Tell us which it is. But they are both such nice places, there isn't a pin to choose. Oh, you fool! Our feast is prepared in the day-room, all laid out so temptingly on a bench. There you'll see ham and eggs, and cheese, and it's my treat, mind. Well, I'm one of the right sort to walk into it, but it seems a pity to throw away this good ration I have just received. I only wish my poor sister and her children could have the benefit of it. Ah, poor things! It's not often they see meat, unless, indeed, when they find a few scraps thrown out before the butcher's door. Oh, bother about your sister and her brats. Let's go in, or Barbillon and the Skeleton will leave nothing but empty trenchers for us. Nicholas and Pique Vinaigre entered together in the day-room, where they found the Skeleton sitting astride on the bench on which the savoury viands were displayed, swearing and grumbling at the absence of the founder of the feast. Oh, there you are, you creeping animal! Exclaimed the ruffian, as he caught sight of the story-teller. What the deuce hindered you from bringing your blessed carcass here a little sooner? He was spinning a yarn with Germain when I found him, answered Nicholas, helping himself to a large slice of ham. Ho, ho! Cried the Skeleton, gazing earnestly on Pique Vinaigre, without however diminishing the ardour with which he devoured the provisions. So you were gossiping with Germain, were you? Yes, I was, returned Pique Vinaigre. Well, what a fool that Germain is! I used to think that he was a sort of spy in the yard, but Lord love you, he is too much of a simpleton for that. Oh, you think so, do you? Said the Skeleton, exchanging a rapid and significant glance with Nicholas and Barbillon. I'm as sure of it as I am that I see a capital ham before me. Besides, how the devil can he be a spy when he is always by himself? He speaks to no one, and nobody ever changes a word with him. And you all know that he runs from us as if we carried the plague in our pockets. Now, how a man can tell many tales who acts as he does, is more than I can conceive. However, spy or not, he will not be able to do us much harm, as to tomorrow he will obtain a room for himself." "The deuce he will!" replied the Skeleton. Then, taking advantage of a conversation which had commenced between Barbillon and Pique Vinaigre, he leaned towards Nicholas and said, whisperingly, "You see, we have not an instant to lose. After 4 o'clock to day, all chance of serving him out is over. It is now nearly 3. You see, unfortunately, he does not sleep in my dormitory, or I would settle him in the night, and to-morrow he will be out of our reach."
"Well, I don't care," answered Nicholas, as though replying to some observation of his companion's. "I say, and I'll stick to it, Germain always seems to look down upon us as though we were not as good as he." "No, no," interposed Pique Vinaigre, "you are quite wrong as regards this young man, you are indeed. You frighten him, you do; and I know that he considers himself not fit to hold a candle to you. Why, if you only knew what he was saying to me just now." "Let's hear what it was." "Why, says he, 'You are a lucky fellow, Pique Vinaigre, you are,' he says, 'to take the liberty of speaking to the celebrated Skeleton,' that was the very word he used, just for all the world as if you were his equal. 'But whenever I meet him,' he says, 'I feel myself overcome with so much awe and respect that, though I would give my eyes out of my head to know him and converse with him, I no more dare to do it than I should make bold to accost the Préfet de Police if he were in his chair of office, and me beholding him body and bones.'"
"He said that, did he?" returned the Skeleton, feigning to believe the well-meant fiction of Pique Vinaigre, as well as to feel gratified by the deep admiration he was reported to have excited in the breast of Germain. "As true as you are the cleverest ruffian upon earth, he said those very words, and more than that, he—" "Oh, then, if that is the case," said the Skeleton, "I shall make it up with him. Barbillon wanted to pick a quarrel with him, but I shall advise him to be quiet." "That's right!" exclaimed Pique Vinaigre, fully persuaded that he had effectually diverted from Germain the danger that threatened him. "That would be much the best way, for this poor chicken-hearted fellow would never quarrel, simply because, like me, he has not pluck enough to fight. Therefore, it is no use getting into a dispute." "Still," cried the Skeleton, "I am sorry, too, that we shall not have our fun. We had quite reckoned upon getting up a fight with Germain to amuse us after dinner. I don't know now what we shall do to kill the time."
"Ah, to be sure!" chimed in Nicholas. "What the deuce shall we do with ourselves? Can anybody tell me?" "Well, then, I'll settle it," said Barbillon. "Since you seem to recommend my leaving Germain alone, I'll agree to do so, on condition that Pique Vinaigre tells us one of his best stories." "Done!" exclaimed the story teller. "But I must make one condition as well as you, and without both are agreed to I don't open my lips."
"Well, then, say what your condition is. I dare say it is not more difficult than the former, and we soon agreed about that."
"It is that this honourable company, which is overstocked with riches," said the Pique Vinaigre, resuming his old tone when addressing his audiences preparatory to commencing his juggling tricks, "will have the trifling kindness to club together and present me with the small sum of 20 sous, a mere trifle, gents, when you are about to listen to the celebrated Pique Vinaigre, who has had the honour of appearing before the most celebrated prigs of the day, he who is now expected at Brest or Toulon, by the special command of his Majesty's government."
"Well, then, we'll stand the 20 sous after you have finished your story."
"After? No, before," said Pique Vinaigre.
"What! Do you suppose us capable of doing you out of 20 sous?" asked the Skeleton, with an air of disdain.
"By no means," replied Pique Vinaigre. "I honour the stone jug with my confidence, and it is in order to economise its purse that I ask for 20 sous in advance."
"On your word and honour?"
"Yes, gentlemen, for after my story you will be so satisfied, that it is not 20 sous but 20 francs, 100 francs, you will force me to take. I know that I should be shabby enough to accept them, and thus, you see, it is from consideration, and you will do wisely to give me 20 sous in advance."
"You don't want for the gift of the gab?"
"I have nothing but my tongue, and I must make use of that. And then, if it must be told, my sister and her children are in terrible distress, and in a small house, Even 20 sous is a consideration." "Then why doesn't your sister prig and her kids too, if they're old enough?" asked Nicholas. "Don't ask me. It dishonours me. I am too kind." "What do you mean, you fool? Why, you encourage her." "True, I encourage her in the vice of being honest, and that is the only line in which she shines. But come, it is agreed that I shall tell you my famous story of Gringalet and Cut in Half. But you must hand out 20 sous, and Barbillon shall not pick a quarrel with this simpleton of a Germain." "Well, you shall have 20 sous, and Barbillon shall not pick a quarrel with that simpleton of a Germain," said the Skeleton. "Then open your ears, and you will hear what you will hear. But it is raining, which will make the customers tumble in, and there will be no occasion to go out and seek them." And the rain began to fall, and the prisoners, quitting the yard, took refuge in the day room, the turnkey being still in attendance. We have said that this room was large and long, with a pavement, and lighted by 3 windows, which looked out into the yard. In the centre was the stove, near which were the Skeleton, Barbillon, Nicholas, and Pique Vinaigre. At a signal from the prévôt, the Gros Boiteux joined this group. Germain was one of the last to enter, absorbed in most delightful thoughts, and he went mechanically to seat himself on the ledge at the lowest window in the apartment, a place he usually occupied, and which no one disputed with him, for it was at a distance from the stove around which the prisoners were assembled. We have already said that some 15 of the prisoners had been informed in the first instance of the treachery attributed to Germain, and the murder which was to avenge it; but soon whispered to one another the plan comprised as many adherents as there were prisoners. These ruffians, in their blind cruelty, considering this fearful plot as legitimate revenge, and viewing therein a certain guarantee against the future disclosure of spies. Germain, Pique Vinaigre, and the turnkey were alone ignorant of what was about to take place. General attention was divided between the executioner, the victim, and the story teller, who was about innocently to deprive Germain of the only succour he could hope for it is nearly sure that the turnkey, when he saw the prisoners attentive to the story of Pique Vinaigre, would think his surveillance useless, and take advantage of that moment of tranquillity to go and take his meal. And when the prisoners had entered, the Skeleton said to the turnkey, "Old fellow, Pique Vinaigre has a capital idea. He is going to tell us his story of Gringalet and Cut in Half. It is weather in which one would not put a policeman out of doors, and we shall quietly wait in till it is time to go to roost." "Why, you are always pretty quiet when he begins his talk, and I have no need for me to be at your heels." "Yes," said the Skeleton, "but Pique Vinaigre asks a high price. He wants 20 sous for his story." "Yes, the trifle of 20 sous, a mere nothing," cried Pique Vinaigre. "Yes, gents, nothing. For who that had a liard would not bestow it to hear the adventures of poor little Gringalet, Cut in Half, and the wicked Gargousse? It will rend your hearts, and make your hair stand on end. And, gents, who is there that would not dispose of the paltry sum of 4 liards, or, if you prefer counting my mites, of 5 centimes, to have their hearts rent and their hair standing on end?" "There are 2 sous," said the Skeleton, throwing down the piece of money before Pique Vinaigre. "Come, is the stone jug too niggardly to enjoy this pastime?" he added, looking at his accomplices with a significant air. Several sous fell around him, to the great joy of Pique Vinaigre, who thought of his sister as he collected the money. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, he said, as he picked up the money. "Now, my rich friends, my capitalists, and others of the cash interest, try once more. You cannot stop at 13, for it is an unlucky number. Only 7 sous deficient, the trifle of 7 sous. What, gents, shall it be said that the Fosse aux Lions could not produce 7 sous? 7 miserable sous? Oh, gents, you would make me believe that you have been brought here very unjustly, or that you have all had a sad run of ill luck." The shrill voice and broad jests of Pique Vinaigre had brought Germain from his reverie, and, as much to follow Rigolette's advice and make himself popular with the prisoners as to give a trifle to the poor devil, who had testified some desire to be of service to him, he rose and threw a piece of 10 sous at the tale teller's feet, who exclaimed, as he pointed at his generous benefactor, 10 sous, gents, you see, I was speaking of capitalists. Honour to that gentleman! He behaves like one of the moneyed interest, as an ambassador to be agreeable to the company. Yes, gents, for it is to him that you will owe the greater portion of Gringalet and Cut in Half, and you will thank him for it. As to the 3 sous over, why, I shall earn them by imitating the voices of the personages, instead of speaking like you and me. That will be another obligation you will owe to this wealthy capitalist, whom you ought to adore." "Come, no more blarney, but begin," said the Skeleton. "One moment, gents," said Pique Vinaigre. "It is but right that the capitalist who has given me 10 sous should be the best situated, except our prévôt, who has first choice." This proposal squared so well with the Skeleton's project that he exclaimed, "True! After me he ought to be best placed." And again he looked significantly at the prisoners. "Yes, yes, let him come nearer," said the prisoners. "Let him sit on the front bench." "You see, young man, your liberality is recompensed. The honourable company sees that you have a right to the front seat," said Pique Vinaigre to Germain. Believing that his liberality had really better disposed his hateful companions in his favour, and delighted thus to follow up Rigolette's earnest desires, Germain, in spite of considerable repugnance, left the place of his choice and went towards the story teller, who, having arranged 4 or 5 benches around the stove by the aid of Nicholas and Barbillon, said, with emphasis, "Here are the dress boxes. All respect to the worthy, the capitalist first. Now, then, let those who have paid take their seats," added Pique Vinaigre, gaily, firmly believing that, thanks to himself, Germain had nothing now to fear. "And those who have not paid," he added, "will sit down or stand up, which they please." Let us sum up the arrangement of his scene. Pique Vinaigre was standing up near the stove ready to commence. Near him was the Skeleton, also standing up, and, with his eyes intently fixed on Germain, ready to rush upon him the moment the turnkey left the cell. At some distance from Germain, Nicholas, Barbillon, Cardillac, and other prisoners, amongst whom was the man with the blue cotton nightcap and gray blouse, occupying the remoter benches. The majority of prisoners, grouped here and there, some sitting on the ground, others standing and leaning against the wall, composed the secondary figures of this picture, lighted à la Rembrandt by 3 lateral windows, which threw strong light and deep shadows on forms so variously characterized and so strongly marked. The turnkey, whose departure was to be, unknown to himself, the signal for Germain's murder, kept close to the door, which was ajar. "Are we all ready?" asked Pique Vinaigre of the Skeleton. "Silence in the stone jug," said the latter, turning half around, and then addressing Pique Vinaigre. "Now begin. We are all attention." CHAPTER XI. Read by Céline Major. Chapter 11, Part 1 of The Mysteries of Paris, Volume 5, by Eugène Sue. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Gringalet and Cut in Half, Part 1. Pique Vinaigre began his recital thus, in the midst of the profound silence of his auditory. It is no inconsiderable time ago that the story occurred which I am about to relate to this honourable company. What was called La Petite Pologne was not then destroyed. The honourable society knows, or does not know, what was called La Petite Pologne. "Well enough," said the prisoner in the blue cap. "They were some small houses near the Rue du Rocher and the Rue de la Pépinière." "Exactly so, my dear sir," replied Pique Vinaigre. "And the Quartier of the Cité, which, at the same time, does not consist of palaces, would be in comparison to La Petite Pologne the Rue de la Paix or the Rue de Rivoli. What a rookery! But, at the same time, very convenient for gents in our line. There were no streets but narrow alleys, no houses but ruins, no pavement but a small carpet of mud and dung heaps, which would have destroyed all the noise of wheels. That is, supposing any carriages passed by that way, but none did. From morn till night, and particularly from night till morn, there were only cries of 'Watch! Watch! Help! Murder!' But the watch took no notice. The more persons were knocked on the head in La Petite Pologne, the fewer persons there were to apprehend. You should have seen the respectable inhabitants who lived there. There were very few jewellers, goldsmiths, and bankers; but then, on the other hand, there were quantities of organ grinders, puppet showmen, punches, and showers of remarkable animals. Amongst the latter was one well known as Cut in Half. He was so cruel, and especially to children. He acquired this name because it was reported that he had cut a small Savoyard in two with a blow of his hatchet. At this moment the prison clock struck 3:15. The prisoners being made to return to their cells at 4:00, the Skeleton's murderous design must be carried into execution before that hour.
Mille tonnerres, the turnkey won't go,
he said in a low tone to Gros Boiteux.
Be easy, he'll go once the story is begun.
Pique Vinaigre continued. No one knew where Cut in Half came from. Some said he was an Italian, others a Bohemian, others a Turk, others an African. The gossips called him a magician, although a magician in our times would be something to look at. What made them believe this was, that he always had with him a large red monkey called Cargousse, and who was so cunning and savage that he seemed as if possessed by the devil. I shall mention this beauty again presently. As to Cut in Half, I shall soon describe him. His complexion was like the old tops of a pair of jockey boots, his hair as red as the hair of his monkey, his eyes green, and, what made the woman think he was a conjurer, he had a black tongue. A black tongue! exclaimed Barbillon. Black as ink, replied Pique Vinaigre. And how did that happen? Because, no doubt, when his mother was in the family way she had perhaps talked of a negro, said Pique Vinaigre with modest assurance. To these attractions Cut in Half joined the profession of having a multitude of tortoises, monkeys, guinea pigs, white mice, foxes, and marmosets, corresponding to an equivalent total of Savoyards and forsaken children. Every morning he distributed his animal to each, and a morsel of black bread, and then dispatched them to beg for only 1/2 penny, or dance the Catarina. Those who only brought in at night 15 sous were beaten, soundly beaten, so that their shrieks might be heard from one end of La Petite Pologne to the other. I should also say that there was in La Petite Pologne a man called Le Doyen, the Dean, because he was the oldest inhabitant, and, as it were, mayor, provost, magistrate, for it was in his room (he kept a Tom and Jerry shop) that all went when they could not otherwise decide their quarrels. Although rather aged, yet Le Doyen was as strong as Hercules, and very generally feared. They swore by him in La Petite Pologne, and when he said, "Very good," all the world said, "Very good." When he said, "That's bad," all the world said, "That's bad." He was a good fellow at bottom, but very fierce, particularly when the strong misused the weak. Then look out for squalls. As he was Cut in Half's nearest neighbour, he had heard the children cry very frequently from the blows which the shower of beasts gave them. He had said to him, "If I hear the children cry, I will make you cry in your turn; and as you have the stronger voice, I will give you the severer beating." "Well done, Le Doyen! I like Le Doyen," said the prisoner in the blue nightcap. "So do I," added the turnkey, as he approached the group. The Skeleton could not repress a movement of angry impatience. Pique Vinaigre proceeded. Thanks to Le Doyen, who had threatened Cut in Half, the cries of the children were heard no more in the night time in La Petite Pologne. But the poor unhappy little fellows did not suffer the less, for if they cried no longer when their master beat them, it was because they were afraid of being more cruelly beaten. As to complaining to Le Doyen, they had no idea of that. For the 15 sous which each little fellow was obliged to bring in, Cut in Half lodged, boarded, and clothed them. In the evening a bit of black bread, as at breakfast, this was their food. He never gave them clothes, that was the way he clothed them. And he shut them up all night with their animals on the same straw in a garret, to which they mounted by a ladder and a trap. This was the lodging.
When once all had ascended, and the tale of children and animals was complete, he took away the ladder and locked the trap. You may judge of the life and row which these monkeys, guinea pigs, foxes, mice, tortoises, marmosets, and children made all in the dark in this cock loft, which was as big as a barn. Cut in Half slept in a room underneath with his great ape, Cargousse, fastened to the foot of his bed. When the brute growled, because there was too much noise in the loft, the beast shower went up the ladder without any light, and, going into the loft, laid about him right and left with a heavy whip, without seeing or counting his blows. As there were always some 15 children, and some of the poor dears brought him in 20 sous a day, Cut in Half, having defrayed all his outlay, which was by no means excessive, had left for himself some 4 or 5 francs a day, with which he enjoyed himself, for it must be told that he was one of the greatest tipplers that ever lived, and was regularly blind drunk once a day. That was his rule, and he declared that, but for that, he should have the headache every day. We should add, that out of his gains he used to buy some sheep's hearts for Gargousse, who ate raw flesh like a cannibal. But I see the honourable society are anxious to be introduced to Gringalet. Here he is, gents.
Let's have Gringalet, and I'll go and eat my soup, said the turnkey. The Skeleton exchanged a look of savage satisfaction with the Gros Boiteux.
Amongst the children to whom Cut in Half distributed his animals, continued Pique Vinaigre, was a poor little devil named Gringalet. Without father or mother, brother or sister, without fire, food, or shelter, he was alone in the world, quite alone in a world which he had not asked to enter, and which he might leave without attracting any one's attention. He was not called Gringalet for any pleasure he had in the name, for he was meagre, lean, and pallid. He did not look above 7 or 8 years old, but was really 13. If he did not seem more than half his name, it was not because of his own will, but because he only fed perhaps every other day, and then so scantily, so poorly, that it was really an exertion to make him pass for 7 years old. "Poor little brat, I think I see him," said the prisoner in the blue cotton nightcap. "There are so many children like him on the streets of Paris dying of hunger." "They must begin to learn that way of living very young in order to get accustomed to it," said Pique Vinaigre, with a bitter smile. "Come on, get on," said the Skeleton suddenly. "The turnkey is getting impatient. His soup is getting cold." "Oh, never mind that," said the Surveillant. "I wish to know something more of Gringalet. It is very amusing." "Yes, it is really very interesting," added Germain, who was very attentive to the story. "Ah, thank ye for saying that, my capitalist," said Pique Vinaigre. "That gives me more satisfaction than your 10 sous piece." "Tonnerre!" exclaimed the Skeleton. "Will you have done with your delays?" "Well, then," replied Pique Vinaigre, "one day Cut in Half had picked up Gringalet in the streets, dying with cold and hunger. Perhaps it would have been best if he had let him die. As Gringalet was weak, he was a coward. As he was a coward, he became the jest and sport of the other lads, who beat him and used him so ill that he would have become wicked if he had not been deficient in strength and courage. But no, when he had been heartily thumped he cried and said, 'I have not done any harm to anybody, and everybody is unkind to me. That's very cruel. Oh, if I were strong and bold!' You will perhaps imagine that Gringalet was about to add, 'I would return to others the ill they do to me.' By no means. He said, 'Oh, if I were strong and bold, I would defend the weak against the strong, for I am weak, and the strong have made me suffer.' In the meanwhile, as he was too small a boy to prevent the strong from ill-using the weak, beginning with himself, he prevented the larger brutes from eating the smaller ones." "What a strange idea!" said the prisoner in the blue cap. "And what is stranger still," said the tale-teller, "it was this idea that consoled Gringalet for being beaten, which proves that his heart was not bad at bottom." "Pardieu, quite the contrary," said the guardian. "What an amusing devil that Pique Vinaigre is!"
At this instant the chimes went 3:30. The Skeleton and Gros Boiteux exchanged significant glances. The time was drawing on, and the Surveillant did not go, and some of the less hardened prisoners seemed almost to forget the sinister projects of the Skeleton against Germain, as they listened attentively to Pique Vinaigre's recital. "When I say," he continued, "that Gringalet prevented the larger brutes from eating the smaller, you must understand that Gringalet did not mix himself up with tigers and lions and wolves, or even foxes and monkeys in the menagerie of Cut in Half. He was too much of a coward for that. But if he saw, for instance, a spider hidden in his web, in wait for a poor foolish fly flying gaily in the sunshine of the good God, without hurting any one, why, in a moment Gringalet smashed the web, freed the fly, and did for the spider like a regular Caesar. A real Caesar. For he turned as white as a sheet in touching such nasty reptiles. And then it required resolution in him, who was afraid of a cockchafer, and had been a long while in forming an intimacy with the tortoise which Cut in Half handed to him every morning. Thus Gringalet, overcoming the fear which the spider caused him, in order to prevent flies from being eaten, proved himself as plucky in his way as a man who attacks a wolf to take a lamb from his jaws," said the prisoner in the blue cap. "Or a man who would have attacked Cut in Half to take Gringalet from his clutches," added Barbillon, who was deeply interested. "As you say," continued Pique Vinaigre, "so that after one of these onslaughts Gringalet did not feel himself so unhappy. He who never laughed, smiled, looked about him, cocked his cap on one side, when he had one, and hummed the Marseillaise with the air of a conqueror. At this moment there was not a spider that dared to look him in the face. Another time it was a grasshopper which was swimming and struggling in a brook. In a moment Gringalet put his 2 fingers boldly in the water and rescued the grasshopper, which he put on the grass. A first-class swimmer, who had fished up his 10th drowning man at 50 francs a head, could not have been prouder than Gringalet when he saw his grasshopper bend his legs and jump away. And yet the grasshopper gave him neither money nor medal, nor uttered any more thanks than did the fly. But then, Pique Vinaigre, worthy friend, the honourable company will say to me, what the devil pleasure could Gringalet, whom all the world thumped and buffeted, find in freeing grasshoppers and destroying spiders? Since people were unkind to him, why did he not take his revenge by doing all the evil in his power? For instance, in giving spiders flies to eat, leaving grasshoppers to drown, or even drowning them on purpose. Yes, why not? Why did he not revenge himself in that way? Asked Nicholas. What good would that have been? Inquired another. Why, to do ill as ill was done to him? No. Well, then, I understand he liked to save flies, poor little chap, said the man in the blue cap. He said, perhaps, who knows if some day they mayn't save me in the same way. My right worthy friend is right, cried Pique Vinaigre, and has read in his heart what I was about to narrate to the honourable assembly. Gringalet was not wicked. He did not see beyond the end of his nose. But he said, Cut in Half is my spider, and perhaps some day some one will do for me what I do for the other poor little flies. Break his web and take me from his clutches. For till then nothing could have induced him to run away from his master. He would as soon have thought of killing himself. However, one day, when neither he nor his tortoise had had a chance, and had not gained between either of them more than 3 sous, Cut in Half beat the poor child very severely, so severely that, ma foi, Gringalet could not stand it any longer, and, tired of being the butt and martyr of everybody, he watched a moment when the trap was open, and, whilst Cut in Half was feeding his animals, he slid down the ladder. Oh, so much the better, said a prisoner. But why didn't he go and complain to the doyen? Inquired the blue cap. He would have served Cut in Half out. Yes, but he dared not. He was too much afraid, and preferred trying to escape. Unfortunately, Cut in Half had seen him, and, seizing him by the wrist, lugged him up again into the loft. Poor Gringalet, thinking of what must befall him, shuddered all over, although he was by no means at the end of his troubles. Apropos of Gringalet's troubles, I must now mention to you Gargousse, the large and favourite ape of Cut in Half. This mischievous brute was, ma foi, taller than Gringalet. Only imagine what a size for a monkey! I must tell you why he was never taken into the streets to be shown, like the other animals of the menagerie. It was because Gargousse was so wicked and powerful that there was not one amongst all the show boys, except an Auvergnat of 14, a determined chap, who after many skirmishes and contests with Gargousse had mastered him, and could lead him about with a chain. And even with him Gargousse frequently got up some fights, which ended in bloodshed produced by Gargousse's bites. Enraged at this, the little Auvergnat said one fine day, "Very well, I will revenge myself on this infernal monkey." And so, one morning, having gone out with the brute as usual, he, in order to appease its savageness, bought a sheep's heart. Whilst Gargousse was eating it, he put a rope through the end of his chain, tied it to a tree, and when he had got the brute quite at his mercy, he gave it an outrageous walloping. "Well done! Bravo, the Auvergnat! Go it, my lad! Skin the beast alive!" said the prisoners. "He did whack him gloriously," continued Pique Vinaigre, "and you should have seen how Gargousse cried, ground his teeth, leaped, danced, and skipped hither and thither; but the Auvergnat used his stick famously. Unfortunately, monkeys, like cats, are very tenacious of life. Gargousse was as crafty as he was vicious, and when he saw, as they say, how the wood was on fire, at a heavy blow he made a final bound, and fell flat at the foot of a tree, shook for a moment, and then shammed dead, lying as motionless as a log. The Auvergnat believed he had done for him, and, thinking the ape dead, he cut away, resolved never again to return to Cut in Half. But the beast Gargousse watched him out of the corner of his eye, and, bruised and wounded as he was, as soon as he saw himself alone he rent the cord asunder with his teeth. The Boulevard Monceau, where he had had this hiding, was close to La Petite Pologne, and the monkey knew his way as easy as his paternoster, and, making off in that direction, arrived at his master's, who roared and foamed when he saw how his monkey had been served. This is not all. From this moment Gargousse entertained such a furious revenge against all children that Cut in Half, who was not the tenderest soul alive, dared not trust him to any one for fear of an accident. For Gargousse was capable of strangling or devouring a child, and all the little brute showers, knowing that, would rather be thrashed by Cut in Half than go near the monkey. "I must really go and eat my soup," said the turnkey, turning towards the door. "This devil of a Pique Vinaigre would wheedle a bird down from a tree to hear him. I can't tell where the deuce he fishes up all he tells." "Now, then, the turnkey will go," said the Skeleton, in a whisper to the Gros Boiteux. "I'm in such a rage I shake all over. Mind and form a wall all around the informer. I will take care of the rest." "Mind now, and be good boys," said the turnkey, turning towards the door. "As good as images," replied the Skeleton, coming closer to Germain, whilst the Gros Boiteux and Nicholas, after having agreed on a signal, made 2 steps in the same direction. "Ah, worthy turnkey, you are going at the most interesting moment," said Pique Vinaigre, with an air of reproach. Had it not been for the Gros Boiteux, who anticipated his intention and seized him suddenly by the arm, the Skeleton would have rushed on Pique Vinaigre. "What, the most interesting moment?" replied the turnkey, turning towards the story teller. "Decidedly," said Pique Vinaigre, "you do not know all you will lose. The most delightful portion of the history is now about to commence." "Don't attend to him!" exclaimed the Skeleton, who with difficulty repressed his rage. "He is not in good trim to day. For my part, I think his story very stupid." "My story very stupid!" cried Pique Vinaigre, wounded in his pride as a tale teller. "Well, turnkey, I beg of you, I entreat you to remain till the conclusion, which, at most, will not be longer than a quarter of an hour, and as by this time your soup must be cold, why, you haven't much to lose by a little delay. I will go ahead with my narrative, so that you may still have time to eat your soup before we are locked up for the night."
Well, then, I'll stay, but make haste," said the turnkey, coming closer towards him. "You are wise to stay, turnkey," continued Pique Vinaigre. "Without bragging, you never heard anything like it before, especially the finale, which is the triumph of the ape, and Gringalet escorted in procession by all the little beast showers and inhabitants of La Petite Pologne. On my word and honour, it is not for the sake of boasting, but it is really superb." "Then tell it speedily, my boy," said the turnkey, returning towards the stove. The Skeleton shook with rage. He almost despaired of accomplishing his crime. If bedtime arrived, Germain must escape, for he was not in the same dormitory with his implacable enemy, and on the following day Germain was to be in a separate cell. "So it's very stupid," continued Pique Vinaigre. "Well, the honourable company shall be the judge of that. There could not exist a more vicious brute than the big ape Gargousse, who was even more savage with children than his master. What does Cut in Half do to punish Gringalet for trying to run away? You shall know by and by. While, in the meantime, he seizes on the unhappy child, and locks him into the cock loft for the night, saying, 'To morrow morning, when all your companions are gone out, I will let you see what I do with vagabonds who try to run away from me.' You may imagine what a wretched night Gringalet passed. He did not close an eye, but kept asking himself what Cut in Half meant to do with him, and then he fell asleep. He had a dream, such a horrid dream, that is, the beginning of it was, as you shall see. He dreamed that he was one of the very poor flies that he had so often rescued from the spider's webs, and that he had fallen into a large and strong web, where he was struggling with all his might, without being able to escape. He then saw coming towards him, stealthily and treacherously, a kind of monster, which looked like Cut in Half turned into a spider. Poor Gringalet began to struggle again, as you may suppose, but the more he struggled the more he got entangled, like the poor flies. At last the spider came up to him, touched him, and he felt the cold and hairy paws of the horrid beast curl around him and enclose him, intending to devour him. He believed he was dead, when, suddenly, he heard a kind of clear, ringing, sharp sort of buzzing, and he saw a beautiful golden fly, with a kind of brilliant dart, like a diamond needle, which flew around the spider with a furious air, and a voice, when I say a voice you must imagine a fly's voice, which said, 'Poor little fly, you have saved flies. The spider shall not.' Unfortunately, Gringalet jumped up at this moment and did not see the end of his dream; but yet he was at first somewhat assured, and said to himself, 'Perhaps the golden fly with the diamond dart would have killed the spider if I had finished the dream.' But in vain did Gringalet endeavour to make himself easy and take comfort. In proportion as the night ended his fears renewed so strongly, that at last he forgot his dream, or rather he only remembered the portion which affrighted him, the large web in which he had been caught and enfolded by the spider which resembled Cut in Half. You may imagine what a fright he was in. Only think! Alone, quite alone, and no one to defend him. In the morning, when he saw daybreak gradually appear through the skylight of the cock loft, his fears redoubled, and the moment was at hand when he would be alone with Cut in Half. He then threw himself on his knees in the middle of the garret, and, weeping bitterly, entreated his comrades to ask Cut in Half to forgive him, or else to help him to escape if possible. But some from fear of their master, others from disregard, and some from ill nature, refused what poor Gringalet requested so earnestly. "Young scamps!" said the prisoner in the blue cap, "he is to be pitied, so helpless. If he could have defended himself, tooth and nail, it would have been very different, ma foi. If you have fangs, show 'em, boy, and defend your tail." "To be sure," said several prisoners. "Holloa there!" exclaimed the Skeleton, unable to conceal his rage, and addressing the blue cap, "won't you hold your jaw? Didn't I say silence in the stone jug? Am I captain of the ward or not?" The blue cap's answer was to look the Skeleton full in the face, and then make that low-lived gesture of the blackguards,
which consists in applying the thumb of the right hand to the end of the nose, opening the fingers like a fan, and putting the little finger on the thumb of the left hand, similarly extended. He accompanied this mute reply with so odd a look that many of the prisoners laughed heartily, whilst others, on the contrary, were actually stupefied at the audacity of the new prisoner, so greatly was the Skeleton feared. The latter shook his fist at the new prisoner, and said to him, grinding his teeth, "We'll settle this to-morrow." "I'll make the calculation on your nob. I'll put down 17 and carry nothing." For fear the turnkey would have fresh motive for staying, in order to repress any row, the Skeleton quietly replied, "That is not what I mean. I am the captain of this room, and ought to be attended to. Ought not I, turnkey?" "Certainly," replied the superintendent, "no interruption. And go on, Pique Vinaigre, and make haste, will you, my lad?" Chapter 11. Read by Céline Major. Chapter 11, Part 2 of The Mysteries of Paris, Volume 5, by Eugène Sue. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Gringolet and Cut in Half, Part 2. "Then," resumed Pique Vinaigre, "Gringolet, seeing how all the world forsook him, resigned himself to his miserable fate. It was broad day, and all the boys were going out with their animals. Cut in Half opened the trap, and called each to give him his morsel of bread. They all descended the ladder, and Gringolet, more dead than alive, squeezed up in a corner of the cock-loft with his tortoise, did not move, but watched his companions as they descended one after the other, and would have given everything he had to have done as they did. At length the last quitted the loft, and then his heart beat quick as he thought his master might forget him. But Cut in Half, who was standing at the foot of the ladder, exclaimed in a loud voice, 'Gringolet! Gringolet!' 'Here I am, master.' 'Come down directly, or I'll fetch you,' added Cut in Half, and Gringolet believed his last hour was come. 'Oh,' said he to himself, as he trembled in all his limbs, and recollected his dream, 'you are in the web, little fly, the spider is going to eat you.' After having put his tortoise quietly down on the ground, he said farewell to it, for he had become fond of the creature, and went to the trap, and put his leg on the ladder to go down, when Cut in Half, taking hold of his miserable little leg, as thin as a stick, pulled him down so suddenly that Gringolet lost his hold, and fell with his face all down the rounds of the ladder. What a pity it was that the Doyen of La Petite Pologne was not there at that moment! What a dance he could have played to Cut in Half, said the Blue Nightcap. It is at such moments as these that a man is always happy and contented to feel how useful it is sometimes to be strong. That's all right, my lad, but unfortunately the Doyen was not there, so Cut in Half seized the hold of the child by the waistband of his little breeches, and carried him down to his own hole of a chamber, where the huge monkey was kept fastened to the foot of his bed. Directly the spiteful beast saw the boy, he began to jump and spring about, grinding his teeth like a mad thing, and darting towards Gringolet as near as his chain permitted him, as though he meant to devour him. Poor Gringolet! However will he be able to escape? If that beast of a monkey once gets hold of him he is safe to strangle him, I declare!" exclaimed the man in the blue cap. "The very thoughts of a poor innocent child being in such a dangerous situation makes me shiver from head to foot, and I seem as though I couldn't hurt a worm. How do you feel, good friends?" "The very same," replied a burst of voices. "No more could we." At this moment the prison clock chimed forth the first 3:15, and the Skeleton, becoming momentarily more and more apprehensive that the time would slip away without their being able to accomplish their design, and furious at the continued interruptions, as well as irritated at the evident sympathy and compassion awakened in the breasts of the prisoners by Pique Vinaigre's recital, called out in an angry voice, "Silence in the stone jug, I say! We shall never get to the end of this unlucky history if you persist in chiming in." The buzz of voices died away at these words, and Pique Vinaigre thus continued.
When it is recollected how much poor little Gringalet had to endure before he could get used to his tortoise, and that even the boldest of his companions trembled and turned pale even at the mention of Gargousse's name, it may very easily be imagined what deadly terror he experienced when he found himself placed by his master within the reach of the horrible monkey. "Oh, master, master!" he cried, as his teeth rattled and shook in his head, as though he were under the influence of an ague fit, "pray, pray forgive me! Pray have mercy on me! I will never do so any more! Indeed, indeed, I never will! Oh, I promise you, master, only let me off this time, and I will never do so again!" But all these prayers and supplications escaped almost unconsciously from the poor child, who had indeed committed no fault that called for such promises. Cut in Half, however, laughed at the boy's terrors, and, spite of the struggles and resistance of the unhappy child, he dragged him within the grasp of Gargousse, who sprang upon him, and seized him with a savage grasp. A cry of execration passed through the assembly, which had been listening with the profoundest attention to the progress of the tale. "I should have been a rare fool had I gone away," said the officer on duty, as he drew nearer to the listening groups. "Oh, but," said Pique Vinaigre, "you've heard nothing as yet. The best is still to come." Directly poor Gringalet felt the cold, hairy paws of the ape seize him by the head and neck, he imagined it was with the intention of devouring him, and, driven almost mad by his agony, he began shrieking and groaning in a manner that would have moved a stone to pity him, while he wildly exclaimed, "Oh, send help! Send help from heaven, God of goodness and of little children! Oh, little golden fly, come and preserve me! Come, little fly, and save me from the horrible spider I dreamed about!" "Will you hold your noise?" exclaimed Cut in Half, as he gave him several hard kicks, for he was fearful lest his cries should be heard. But in a minute's time there was no further danger of that, for the poor boy neither cried or struggled further, but, pale and cold as marble, he remained kneeling, while the devilish monkey clawed and scratched and buffeted the trembling victim, who, closing his eyes, resigned himself to his fate. After Gargousse had tired himself with thus tormenting poor Gringalet, he suddenly paused, and looked up to his master's countenance, as though asking what he should do next. And really it seemed as though the ape and his master understood each other's thoughts, for Gargousse immediately renewed the attack by plucking out handfuls of the shuddering boy's hair, upon which Cut in Half burst into fits of laughter, so long and so loud, that had poor Gringalet tried ever so hard, he could not have made himself heard amid these wicked and malicious rejoicings. They had, however, the effect of encouraging Gargousse, who proceeded to attack the unfortunate child with redoubled fierceness. "Ah, you beggar of a monkey!" exclaimed Blue Bonnet. "I only wish I had been near enough to catch hold of your tail. I'd have swung you around and round like a windmill, and finished by knocking out your dirty brains against the hardest stone I could find. That beastly ape was as cruel as if he had been a man." "Oh!" cried a simultaneous burst of voices, "no man ever was, or ever will be so cruel as that, I'm sure." "Hallo!" interrupted Pique Vinaigre, "you forget Cut in Half when you make that remark. However, just listen to what he did next. He unfastened the long chain of Gargousse from the leg of his bed, around which it was generally secured, and tied it to the waist of the poor trembling child, who by this time was more dead than alive, so that the monkey and the boy were thus placed at the opposite ends of the chain. There was a devil's own intention. Ay, it is quite certain that some human creatures are more cruel than the most savage wild beast." When Cut in Half had completed this arrangement, he said to the monkey, who appeared to understand every word he said, and certainly these were such a precious pair it would have been 1,000 pities they should have had any difficulty in the matter, "Now then, Gargousse, attention! You have been exhibited with all your clever tricks, but it is now your turn to be a showman. You shall be master, and Gringalet shall be monkey. Yes, your monkey. So up with you, Gringalet, or I shall set Gargousse on you and let him tear you to pieces." The unhappy child, unable to utter a word, had again fallen on his knees, holding up his clasped hands in mute supplication, while the only sound he could utter proceeded from the convulsive rattling of his teeth. "Make him stand upright, Gargousse," said Cut in Half to his ape, "and if he is obstinate, do as I am doing." And with these words he belaboured the child with a switch he held in his hand. Then, passing the stick to the monkey, he added, "Make him stand up. Hit harder. Harder. You all know what close imitators all monkeys are, but Gargousse was ever remarkable for his extreme quickness in copying the action of others. He was not long, therefore, in bestowing so severe a flagellation on the shoulders of his terrified victim as soon compelled him to try at least to stand upon his feet, and once up, the unhappy child became as nearly as possible the same height as the ape. Then Cut in Half went out of the room, and descended the staircase, calling out to Gargousse to follow him, which he did, tugging violently at the end of the chain to which Gringalet was fastened, and compelling him to follow like a slave, at the same time beating him as hard as he could with his cane; and thus they reached the small courtyard belonging to the miserable tenement occupied by Cut in Half and his livestock. Now, then, Cut in Half reckoned on having a good sport, so, first securing the door that opened into the lane, he made signs to Gargousse to play Gringalet round and round the yard as fast as he could. The ape loved the fun as well as his master, and coursed the frightened boy round the yard, beating him with all the strength the switch admitted of, while Cut in Half laughed till his sides ached. Perhaps you may think this malicious nature was now satisfied. Not a bit of it. This was a mere beginning. So far, Gringalet had merely endured excessive fright, been torn and scratched by the sharp teeth and claws of Gargousse, and severely beaten with the stick. This, however dreadful, was far from contenting Cut in Half's savage nature. He therefore devised another scheme, equally diabolical with his other proceedings. In order to enrage the monkey still more against the unhappy boy, who by this time was more dead than alive, he seized Gringalet by the hair of his head, and after feigning to overwhelm him with blows, he pushed him towards the monkey, saying, "Tear him, worry him," showing Gargousse at the same time a great lump of sheep's heart, as much as to say, "Do as I bid you, and here is your reward." And then began a fearful sight. Just imagine a huge red ape, with a black muzzle, grinding his teeth like a mad thing, and throwing himself in a state of savage fury on the poor helpless object of his cruelty, who, unable to defend himself, had no other means of preserving his face and eyes from being torn to pieces than by throwing himself down on the ground, flat on his face. Seeing this, Gargousse, wrought up by his master to a state of frenzied hatred against poor Gringalet, bestrode him as he lay on the ground, seized him by the neck, and bit him on the back of his head till the blood came. "Oh, the spider I dreamed of!" cried poor Gringalet, firmly believing now that he should be devoured. All at once a noise was heard at the gate that opened from the lane into the yard. Knock, knock, knock. "Ha, ha!" exclaimed all the prisoners at once. "How delightful! 'Tis Le Doyen come to set the boy free. Oh, tell us if it was not." "Yes, my good friends, you have guessed right. It was Le Doyen, and he cried out, 'Now then, Cut in Half, will you open the door or no? Don't pretend to be deaf. I see you through the keyhole.' The exhibitor of beasts was obliged to answer, and went grumblingly along to open the gate for Le Doyen, who was a regular brick of a man, as strong and sturdy as a mountain for all his age, and, moreover, he was one of those persons with whose displeasure it was nothing but safe to trifle. "Well, what do you want with me?" asked Cut in Half, half opening the yard door. "I have something to say to you," answered Le Doyen, entering almost forcibly into the little courtyard. Then, observing the savage conduct of the monkey, he ran towards him, seized him by the scruff of the neck, and sought to fling him to the other end of the yard. But perceiving that the boy and the animal were chained together, Le Doyen cast a stern and fearful glance on Cut in Half, as he called out in a severe tone, "Let this unfortunate child loose directly."
Only conceive the joyful surprise experienced by Gringalet, who, nearly dead with terror, found himself so unexpectedly preserved, and by means which seemed to him so miraculous that he could not help turning his eyes on his preserver with a recollection of the golden winged fly he had seen in his dream, though he saw merely a stout, square-built elderly gentleman, looking more like a creature of earth than air. "Well, now, then," said the officer on duty, "now that Gringalet is safe, I will go and take my soup." "Safe!" exclaimed Pique Vinaigre, "not a bit of it. Bless you, poor little Gringalet has not got to the worst of his troubles yet." "No?" cried several prisoners with the deepest interest. "No, hasn't he, though? But what else happened to him, then?" inquired the officer. "Wait a bit, and you'll hear," answered the story teller. "What a fellow that Pique Vinaigre is!" cried the officer. "He makes you do just as he pleases. Well, I'll stay a little longer, at any rate." The Skeleton spoke not, but he actually foamed with rage as Pique Vinaigre thus continued his recital. Cut in Half, who feared Le Doyen as the devil fears holy water, had, in a grumbling manner, unfastened the chain from Gringalet's waist, which done, Le Doyen tossed Gargousse up in the air, and when he fell to the ground he gave him so desperate a kick in his ribs that he sent him rolling 10 feet off. The monkey screamed with passion, chattered, and ground his teeth with rage. Then, fearing a repetition of the rough usage he had experienced, scampered away, and, climbing to the roof of a small shed, manifested his hatred of Le Doyen by a variety of threatening gestures. "What do you mean by ill-using my monkey?" inquired Cut in Half of Le Doyen. "You ought rather to ask me why I do not beat you instead of your spiteful beast there. For shame! Thus to torture and ill-use a poor helpless boy! Is it possible you can be drunk at this early hour of the morning?" "I am no more drunk than you are. I was teaching my monkey a trick I wish him to learn. I want to get up a scene between Gringalet and my monkey. I attend to my business, and I only wish other people would do the same, and not trouble themselves with what does not concern them. And I tell you that I have a right to interfere in the present case, and that it is my duty to do so. This morning, when I missed Gringalet from among the other children who passed by my window, I inquired of them where he was. They did not make me any answer, but hung down their heads and seemed confused. I know you, therefore suspected the boy was kept back for some bad purpose, and it seems I was not mistaken. Now just listen to me. Every day that I do not see Gringalet pass door with the other lads, I will come here to know the reason, whether you like it or not. And what's more, you shall produce him alive and well, or I'll knock you down. I shall do precisely as I please with the boy without asking your leave," answered Cut in Half, excessively irritated by this threat of keeping him under surveillance. "You'll just please to keep your hands to yourself; and if you do not take yourself off, and if ever you presume to show your face here again, I'll "Take that, then, as an earnest of the future," cried Le Doyen, interrupting Cut in Half by a couple of blows heavy enough to knock down a rhinoceros. "You deserve that and more, too, for presuming to answer Le Doyen of La Petite Pologne in so impertinent a manner." "Oh, Lord, Lord!" groaned forth the man in the blue cap. "Only 2 blows! I wish I had had the handling of him. He should have had a round dozen to begin with, and afterwards I would have knocked all his teeth down his throat." "As far as strength went," continued Pique Vinaigre, "Le Doyen could have killed and eaten a score of such fellows as the beast-master, so Cut in Half was compelled to pocket the affront. But he was not the less incensed at being struck in the presence of Gringalet, and well did he promise to be richly avenged for the indignity he had sustained. And an idea suddenly suggested itself to him, which could only have originated in the mind of a fiend of malice like himself. While he was meditating on his diabolical scheme, Le Doyen said, 'Bear in mind that if you torment this poor boy any more, I will just make you and your menagerie turn out and quit La Petite Pologne, or I will bring the whole neighbourhood to pull your house about your ears. You know very well how universally you are hated already,
and you may rest assured you will have such an escort to conduct you hence as shall leave you marks enough on your back to serve as a remembrance of your parting, let you live as long as you may, that I promise you." Like a treacherous, mean-spirited wretch as he was, Cut in Half, the better to effect his villainous design, instead of quarrelling further with Le Doyen, feigned to submit to his decision, and replied in a false, wheedling tone, "You were wrong to strike me, my worthy neighbour, or to imagine I had any intention of harming Gringalet. On the contrary, I tell you again I was merely teaching my monkey a new trick. He is rather awkward when he is put out in any way, and while trying to manage him the boy got a few trifling bites, which I very much regret." "Humph!" said Le Doyen, casting a scrutinizing look on him. "Now is this all gospel you are telling me? And why, if you only wished to teach a thing to your monkey, did you fasten him to Gringalet? Because the boy has to learn the trick as well as the animal. Now this is what I want to do: to dress up Gargousse in a red coat and hat with a feather in it, like a barber, and then Gringalet is to sit in a little chair, with a cloth tucked under his chin, while the monkey affects to shave him with a large wooden razor." The joke appeared so very droll to Le Doyen that he could not forbear laughing. "Isn't that a funny idea?" inquired Cut in Half in a crafty and malicious manner. "Why, upon my word," answered Le Doyen, "it does strike me as a very amusing device, and one which, I doubt not, your monkey would carry into execution most admirably, that is, if he be as clever and skilful in imitation as he is represented." "Oh, bless you," continued Cut in Half, "when he has seen me for 5 or 6 times make believe to shave Gringalet, he will imitate me exactly with his large wooden razor. But for that purpose it is absolutely necessary he should become habituated to the boy, and that was my reason for fastening them both together." "But why did you select Gringalet more than any other of your boys?" "Because he was the least among 'em, so that, you see, when he sat down the monkey was the taller of the two." "To be sure I had another reason besides, M. le Doyen, although I know a man oughtn't to own such a thing as making a difference with his boys, but for all that, I'll own the truth, whatever comes of it, and that is, that I made choice of this here little chap because I meant to give half the profits from the performance to whoever it was acted the scene with the animal, because I knew, in course, it was disagreeable." "Well," said Le Doyen, completely galled by this false and hypocritical manner of accounting for the conduct which had first attracted his displeasure, "well, if such be the case, I can only say, I'm very sorry I gave you such a very hard thump. However, it does not matter, just consider it as paid on account, so that—" While Cut in Half was talking with Le Doyen, poor little Gringalet durst scarcely breathe. He trembled like an aspen leaf, and though dying with eagerness to throw himself at the feet of Le Doyen, and to supplicate of him to take him away from his cruel master, he had not courage to make the attempt, and in a low, despairing voice he murmured to himself, "I shall be like the poor fly I dreamed about, and the horrid spider will eat me up. It was folly of me to expect that any golden fly would come to save me." "Come, my lad, since your master means to let you share his profits, you ought to try and get used to acting with the monkey. Never mind being tied to him, he won't hurt you, I dare say, and then, you know, when you have earned a large sum of money by doing this trick with him, you will have nothing to complain of." "Complain, indeed!" exclaimed his master, giving him at the same time a side look that froze poor Gringalet's blood. "What should he know of complaining? Now then, speak up, and tell this worthy gentleman whether you ever have had anything to complain of. Come, let's hear all about it. Have you any cause of complaint, you are asked?" "No, no, master," stammered out the unhappy child. "You hear what he says," said Cut in Half, turning to Le Doyen. "He never has had anything to complain of. No, I should rather think not. Why, bless you, I was only thinking of his good when I tied him to the monkey, and if he has got a bit of scratch from Gargousse, why, I'll take care it does not happen again. The monkey is just a little awkward at first, but I'll see to it for the future. Take my word for it, it won't happen again. That's all right, then, and now everybody's satisfied, are they not?" "Gringalet is, most especially. Are you not, my fine fellow?" asked Cut in Half, casting a savage glance on the poor child. "Yes, yes, master," sobbed forth the wretched boy. "And I'll tell you what I'll do further. To make up for the scratches you have got from the monkey, I'll let you share in a good breakfast I meant to order from our worthy Doyen's excellent larder. I intend having a dish of mutton chops and pickles, 4 bottles of wine, and a pint of brandy." "Much obliged to you," answered the Doyen. "All shall be sent as you desire. Few men have a better cellar or more tempting larder, and the contents of both are at the service of all who can pay for them." The Doyen was not a bad sort of a man, but it must be remembered that he had his living to get, and therefore, so that he disposed of his eatables and drinkables at a sufficient profit, he cared but little who it was in that case; friend or foe were quite alike to him. The beggar, Cut in Half, knew well enough where his weak side lay, so he hit upon this method of getting rid of him, in high good humour at having by his visit not only ascertained the safety of Gringalet, but also obtained a good order. And now was the unfortunate child thrown into the hands of his master, past all hopes of safety. For no sooner had Le Doyen turned his back than Cut in Half, pointing to the staircase with a dreadful frown, bade the trembling lad betake himself to his garret without loss of time; and the frightened child, glad at any rate to be freed from the monkey and his master, did not require a second bidding, but made off as fast as his strength permitted him. When Gringalet reached his own wretched chamber, he threw himself on the dirty straw allotted him for a bed beside his tortoise, and wept as though his heart were breaking. "He will surely kill me!" cried the miserable boy, as he reflected on the cruelty of his master and his own inability to escape from him. "What shall I do? Oh, how I wish I were dead and in my grave!" Thus he remained sobbing and lamenting for more than an hour, when he was roused by hearing the coarse voice of Cut in Half calling upon him to descend. And the terror of the boy was still further increased by discovering a considerable alteration in the rough tones of his master. "Now, then," roared out the brutal man, with a torrent of oaths, "are you coming down, or must I fetch you?" The unhappy child almost slid down the ladder in his haste to descend, but scarcely had he reached the bottom than Cut in Half seized hold of him, and dragged him to his own room, stumbling at every step he took, for the fellow had been drinking so hard that he could scarcely stand on his legs while his body swung to and fro like the sails of a windmill. Almost bereft by extreme intoxication of the power of speech, he continued to gaze on the shrinking child with eyes full of dreadful meaning, though his tongue was unable to declare the murderous designs he meditated. Never had the poor boy endured such horror at the sight of his master. Gargousse was chained as usual to the foot of the bed, and in the middle of the room stood a chair, from the back of which hung a strong cord. "Sit down there," cried the tyrant, as he pointed to the seat. Gringalet obeyed in silence, and Cut in Half, without another word, twisted the rope around him, and finally secured him in the chair so firmly that, even if poor Gringalet had dared to struggle, it would have been impossible for him to have extricated himself. "Great and good God!" murmured the wretched child, "this time no one will come to deliver me from my danger." And the poor little fellow was right, for indeed it was utterly impossible, and for this reason, that no sooner had Le Doyen gone away with the idea of all being comfortably arranged between the boy and his master than Cut in Half hastened to double lock and bolt the entrance to his premises, so that no person could gain admission without his knowledge. "Oh, poor little Gringalet!" exclaimed all the prisoners, deeply excited by the recital. "It's all up with him, that's quite sure." "I'd give my last franc piece to get him out of the hands of that blackguard, that I would!" cried a multitude of voices, as though one unanimous sympathy actuated each breast. "I wonder what that beggar of a Cut in Half is going to do with the poor little chap?" added they, in almost breathless interest. "Come, push on, and let's hear." Pique Vinaigre continued. When Gringalet was well secured in the chair, his master said to him," and here the narrator imitated most naturally the thick speech and stammering tones of a drunken man. "Ah, you scoundrel! You are the cause of my being thrashed by the Doyen. You shall die for it, you young devil!" Then he took from his pocket a freshly sharpened razor, opened it, and seized Gringalet by the hair of his head. At the sight of the razor the child began to weep. "Pardon, master, pardon! Do not kill me!" "Cry away, you infernal brat! You shall not cry long," replied Cut in Half. "Golden Fly, Golden Fly, come to my help!" exclaimed poor Gringalet, almost mad, and remembering the dream that had had such an effect upon him, "for the spider is going to kill me." "What, you call me a spider, do you?" said Cut in Half. "For this and many other things, you shall die, I tell you, not by my hand, because that wouldn't do, and besides, they'd scrag me, and so I'll say and prove that it was the ape. I have managed it all, and so, never mind, for that's all about it," he added, preserving his equilibrium with the greatest difficulty. Then calling the monkey, which, at the end of his chain, was grinning and looking at his master and the boy, "Here, Gargousse," he said, pointing to the razor, and then to Gringalet, whom he had seized by the hair of his head, "do so to him," and then drawing the back of the razor several times over Gringalet's throat, he feigned to cut his throat. The devil of a monkey was such a close imitator, so wicked and so sly, that he understood what his master desired, and as if to prove to him that he did so, he took his chin in his left paw, put his head back, and with his right paw pretended to cut his throat. "That's it, Gargousse, that's it," said Cut in Half, stammering, with his eyes half closed, and staggering so much that he almost fell with Gringalet and the chair. "Yes, that's it. I'll unfasten you, and you'll slice this weasand. Won't you, Gargousse?" The ape shrieked as he ground his teeth, as much as to say yes, and put out his paw as if to take the razor that Cut in Half handed to him. "Golden Fly, come to my rescue!" murmured Gringalet in a faint voice, and assured that his last hour was come. Alas! He called the Golden Fly without any hopes of its coming to his rescue. He did so as a drowning man exclaims, "Mon Dieu! Mon Dieu!" Yet at this very moment Gringalet saw enter into the room one of those small gold and green flies, which look like a spangle of gold flying and flitting around and about, and at the very moment when Cut in Half was going to give the razor to Gargousse, the gold fly went plump into the eye of this horrible ruffian. A fly in the eye is no great thing, but at the moment it hurts like the prick of a pin, and thus Cut in Half, who could scarcely support himself, raised his hand to his eye so suddenly that he staggered and fell at full length, rolling on the ground like a log to the foot of the bed to which Gargousse was fastened. "Golden Fly, many thanks! You have saved me!" cried Gringalet, who, seated and fastened to the chair, had observed all. "Ma foi! It really was true, then, and the Golden Fly prevented his having his throat cut!" exclaimed the prisoners, overjoyed. "The Golden Fly for ever!" cried the Blue Cap. "Listen now," continued the story teller, "for this is the most beautiful and terrible of the history I had promised you. Cut in Half had fallen like a lump of lead, and was so drunk that he could move no more than a log. He was dead drunk and perfectly senseless. But in his fall he very nearly crushed Gargousse, and almost broke his hind paw. You know how savage and revengeful this infernal brute was, and he still held in his paw the razor which his master had given him to cut Gringalet's throat. What do you suppose the animal did when he saw his master on his back and within his reach? Why, he jumped upon him, squatted on his breast,
and whilst with one paw he pushed up his chin to expose his neck, with the other he cut his throat as clean as a whistle, just as Cut in Half had taught him to do with poor Gringalet a few minutes before. "Bravo! Bravo! Well done! Gargousse forever! The little golden fly forever! Gringalet forever! Gargousse forever!" Well, my friends, I assure you, as you shout now, so did the whole population of La Petite Pologne shout an hour afterwards, said Pique Vinaigre, delighted at the success of his story and the enthusiasm of his hearers. "In what way?" "I told you that, in order to complete his wicked purpose at his ease, the vagabond Cut in Half had closed the door inside. Towards the evening, the boys came in one after the other with their animals. The first rapped, but no answer. Then, when they had all arrived, they knocked at the door, but no reply. So one went to find Le Doyen to tell him how they had knocked in vain, and that their master did not open to them. "The fellow must be as drunk as an Englishman," said he. "I sent him some wine just now. We must break open the door, for the children cannot pass the night out of doors." So they burst in the door, and then they went up the stairs, and what should they see but Gargousse chained and crouching on his master's body, playing with the razor. Poor Gringalet was fortunately out of Gargousse's reach and still on the chair, not daring to look on Cut in Half's body, but gazing at, guess what? The little golden fly, which, after having flitted round and round the child as if to congratulate him, had, at last, come and settled on his poor little hand. Gringalet related all to Le Doyen and the crowd that came in, and, as it really appeared like the interposition of Providence, Le Doyen cried, "A triumph for Gringalet! A triumph to Gargousse, who killed the infamous Cut in Half! He cut others, it was his turn to be cut himself." "Yes, yes," cried the assembled mob, for the beast shower was universally detested, "a triumph to Gargousse! A triumph for Gringalet!" It was night, and they lighted straw torches, fastened Gargousse to a bench, which 4 chaps carried on their shoulders, and the blackguard of an ape seemed as if he felt his consequence, and gave himself the airs of a conquering hero by showing his teeth to the multitude. After the ape came Le Doyen carrying Gringalet in his arms, then all the little fellows, each carrying his beast, followed him, one with his fox, another his marmotte, another his guinea pig. And those who played on the hurdy-gurdy played now. Then there were the charcoal sellers who had their bells, and there was such an uproar, such joy, such a fête as can be scarcely imagined. Behind the musicians and animal showers came all the dwellers in La Petite Pologne, men, women, and children, all holding straw torches, and hallooing like mad, "Vive Gringalet! Vive Gargousse!" The procession advanced in this way around the place in which Cut in Half dwelt. It was a very singular sight to see the old buildings lighted up by the red light of the straw torches, which flared and flared. As to Gringalet, the first thing he did when he was at liberty was to put the little golden fly in a paper bag, and he exclaimed during his triumph, "Little flies, I did very right in preventing the spiders from eating you, for—" Pique Vinaigre was interrupted by a voice from without, exclaiming, "Père Roussel, come to your soup! It only wants 10 minutes to 4. Ma foi, the story is nearly finished, and I must go. Many thanks, my lad. You have amused me very much, and that you may tell everybody," said the superintendent to Pique Vinaigre, going to the door, then pausing. "Mind and be quiet," he said, turning towards the prisoners. Chapter 11, Part 2. Read by Céline Major. Chapter 11, Part 3 of The Mysteries of Paris, Volume 5, by Eugène Sue. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Gringalet and Cut in Half, Part 3. "We shall hear the end of the story," said the Skeleton, breathless with suppressed rage. Then adding in a whisper to Gros Boiteux, "Follow him to the door, and, when you see him leave the yard, cry 'Gargousse,' and the informer is a dead man." "All right," said Le Gros Boiteux, who accompanied the guardian and remained at the door watching his steps as he went away. I tell you, then, resumed Pique Vinaigre, that Gringalet, during the whole time of his triumph, said, 'Little flies I have.'" "Gargousse!" cried Gros Boiteux as the turnkey quitted the yard. "I'm here, Gringalet, and I will be your spider!" cried the Skeleton instantly, and darting so suddenly on Germain that he could not make a struggle or utter a cry. His voice expired under the tremendous gripe of the Skeleton's iron fingers. "If you are the spider, I'm the golden fly, skeleton of evil!" cried a voice at the moment when Germain, surprised at the violent and sudden attack of his implacable enemy, had fallen back on the bench entirely at the mercy of the ruffian, who, with his knee on his breast, held him by the neck. "Yes, I will be the fly, and a fly of the right sort," repeated the man in the blue cap, of whom we have already spoken, and then, with a fierce spring, he dashed upon the Skeleton, and assailed him on the skull and between his eyes with a shower of blows from his fist, so tremendous that it sounded like the noise of a smith's hammer ringing on an anvil. The man in the blue cap, who was no other than the Chourineur, added, as he redoubled the quickness of his hammering on the Skeleton's head, "It is the shower of blows which M. Rodolph drummed on my sconce, and I have recollected them." At this unexpected assault the prisoners were all struck with surprise, and did not take part either for or against the Chourineur. Several of them, still under the influence of the salutary impression made on them by Pique Vinaigre's story, were even glad of an event which saved Germain. The Skeleton staggered at first, and, reeling like an ox under the butcher's poleaxe, mechanically extended his hands to try and ward off his adversary's blows, and Germain, thus freed from the deadly clutch of the Skeleton, half raised himself. "What does this mean? Who is this scoundrel?" exclaimed Le Gros Boiteux, and, rushing at the Chourineur, he endeavoured to seize his arms from behind, whilst the latter was making violent efforts to keep the Skeleton down on the bench. Germain's defender replied to Le Gros Boiteux's attack by a kind of kick, so violent that it sent the cripple rolling on the ground to the farther end of the circle formed by the prisoners. Germain, whose face was livid and purple, half suffocated, and on his knees by the bench, seemed unconscious of all that was passing around him. The strangulation had been so violent that he could scarcely breathe. After his first surprise was over, the Skeleton, by a desperate effort, contrived to keep the Chourineur off and regain his feet. Breathless, drunk with rage and hatred, he was fearful to look upon. His cadaverous face streamed with blood, his upper lip curled like that of a furious wolf, exposed his teeth clenched against each other. At last he exclaimed, in a voice palpitating with anger and exertion, for his struggle had been very violent, "Stab him, the ruffian, you cowards, who let me be traitorously attacked, or the informer will escape." During this momentary truce, the Chourineur, raising Germain half fainting, had managed very cleverly to put him in an angle of the wall, and, availing himself of this advantageous position of defence, he was able, without fear of surprise from behind, to resist any attack of the prisoners, on whom the skill and herculean powers he had displayed had imposed considerable respect. Pique Vinaigre, greatly alarmed, had disappeared without his absence being remarked. Seeing hesitation amongst the majority of prisoners, the Skeleton exclaimed, "Aid me now, let us do for both, the big 'un as well as the little 'un." "Look out for squalls, then," replied the Chourineur, preparing for a struggle, with his two hands squared, and standing well balanced on his loins, "and mind your eyes, Skeleton. If you mean to play the Cut in Half, I'll serve you as Gargousse did, and slit your weasand." "Fall on him!" said the Gros Boiteux, getting up. "Why does this vagabond defend spies? Death to the informer, and to him too! If he defends Germain, he is a traitor. Yes, yes, death to the spy! Death!" "Yes, and death to the traitor who defends him!" Such were the cries uttered by the fiercest of the détenus. Another party, more merciful, exclaimed, "No, let's hear him first." "Yes, let him explain. We mustn't kill a man without a hearing." "And without means of defence, too. Must we be cut in halves?" "So much the better," replied the Skeleton's partisans. "Nothing's too bad for a spy." "Let's fall on him. Let us support the Skeleton." "Yes, let's at the blue cap." "No, let's support the blue cap, and let's at the Skeleton," retorted the Chourineur's party.
No, down with the blue cap! Down with the Skeleton!
Well done, my boys! cried the Chourineur, addressing the prisoners who sided with him. You're good fellows, and would not massacre a half-dead man. None but cowards would do that. The Skeleton does not care what evil he does. He is sentenced beforehand, and that is why he urges you on. But if you help to kill Germain, you will be severely punished for it. Besides, I have something to propose. The Skeleton is desirous of doing for this young man. Well, let him come and take him if he thinks he has the pluck to do it. Let us two settle it. Leave us to ourselves, and see what turns up. But he's afraid. He's like Cut in Half, only strong with the weak." The vigour, energy, and rough manner of the Chourineur had powerful effect on the prisoners, and a considerable number of them had ranged themselves on his side and surrounded Germain, whilst the Skeleton's party drew around that ruffian. A bloody fray would have ensued, when there was heard in the yard the sonorous and measured tread of a piquet of infantry, always on guard in the prison. Pique Vinaigre, profiting by the general stir and noise, had gained the yard, and having knocked at the wicket of the entrance, had told the turnkeys what was passing in the day room. The arrival of the soldiers put an end to this scene. Germain, the Skeleton, and the Chourineur were taken before the governor of La Force. The first to make his complaint, the two others to answer for creating a disturbance inside the gaol. The fright and suffering of Germain had been so great, his weakness so extreme, that he was obliged to lean on two of the turnkeys in order to reach a chamber next to the governor's room. There he was very ill. His neck, excoriated as it was, bore the livid and bleeding imprint of the Skeleton's iron grasp. A few minutes more, and Rigolette's betrothed would have been strangled. The turnkey, who had taken an interest in Germain, gave him first assistance. When he had recovered, his first thought was of his deliverer. "Thanks for your kind care, sir," he said to the turnkey; "but for that brave man I must have been killed. Where is he?" "In the governor's room, telling him how the disturbance arose. It appears that but for him—" "I must have been killed. Oh, tell me his name. Who is he?" "His name I do not know, but they call him the Chourineur. He is an old offender." "And is his crime now very serious?" "Very. Burglary in the night in an inhabited house," replied the turnkey. "He will probably have a similar dose to Pique Vinaigre, 15 or 20 years of hard labour." Germain shuddered. He would have preferred being bound by gratitude to a man less criminal. "How dreadful!" he said. "And yet this man, without knowing me, defended me. Such courage, such generosity!" "Ah, these men have sometimes a touch of good. The main point is that you are saved. To morrow you will have your private cell, and to night you will sleep in the infirmary. So courage, sir. The bad time is over. And when your pretty little visitor comes to see you, you can comfort her, for once in a cell you have nothing to fear. Only you will do wisely, I think, not to tell her of this affair." "Certainly not, but I should like to thank my defender." "I have just been leaving the governor, who will now interrogate the Skeleton, and I shall take them both, the Skeleton to his dungeon directly, and the Chourineur to the Fosse aux Lions. He will be, besides, somewhat rewarded for what he has done for you. As he is a determined and stout fellow, he will probably replace the Skeleton as captain of the ward." The Chourineur, having crossed a small passage from the governor's apartment, entered the room in which Germain was. "Wait for me here," said the turnkey to the Chourineur. "I will go and ask the governor what he decides upon as to the Skeleton, and I will return and let you know. Our young man has quite recovered, and wishes to thank you, and so he should, for otherwise it would have been all over with him." And the turnkey went out. The Chourineur's countenance was very joyous, and he advanced towards Germain, saying, with a cheerful air, "Thunder, how glad I am, how glad I saved you!" And he extended his hand to Germain, who, by a feeling of involuntary repulsion, withdrew somewhat, instead of taking the hand which the Chourineur offered to him. Then, remembering that he owed his life to this man, he was desirous of repairing this display of repugnance. But the Chourineur perceived it. His features became overcast, and, retreating in his turn, he said, with bitter sorrow, "Oh, it is right. Your pardon, sir." "No, it is I who ought to ask your pardon. I am not a prisoner like yourself. Ought I not to think of the service you have rendered me?" You have saved my life. Your hand, sir, I beg, I entreat, your hand." "Thanks, but it is useless now. The first feeling is everything. If you had directly given me a grasp of the hand it would have afforded me pleasure, but when I reflect I would not desire it. Not because I am a prisoner like you," he added with a sombre and hesitating air, "because, before I came here, I have been—" "The turnkey told me all," said Germain, interrupting him. "But yet you saved my life." "I have done no more than my duty and pleasure, for I know who you are, M. Germain." "You know me?" "A little, my lad," said the Chourineur, resuming his usual tone of habitual carelessness, "and, pardieu, you would have been very wrong to have attributed my arrival at La Force to chance. If I had not known you, I should not have been in prison." Germain looked at the Chourineur with amazement. "What! It was because you knew me?" "That I am here a prisoner in La Force." "I, who owe you—" "A candle to the Virgin for having procured me the advantage of being in La Force." "Really," said Germain, passing his hand over his brow, "I do not know whether the terrible shock I have just undergone has weakened my senses, but it is impossible for me to understand you." "The turnkey told me you were here under a charge of," said Germain, with hesitation. "Robbery, pardieu! And robbery with forcible entry, and, moreover, at night. Nothing could be more complete!" cried the Chourineur, with a hearty laugh. Germain, painfully excited at the bold hardihood of the Chourineur, could not forbear saying to him, "What, you, so brave, so generous, and speak in this way? Are you not aware of the terrible punishment to which you are exposed?" 20 years at the galleys, I know that. I am an out and out scoundrel, I know that, for taking it so easy. But what's the use when one has been and done it? And then for me to say that it was you, M. Germain," added the Chourineur, heaving a tremendous sigh, and with an air of assumed contrition, "who are the cause of my misfortune." "When you explain yourself more clearly, I shall understand you. Just as much as you please, but my gratitude for the service you have rendered me will never cease or diminish," added Germain, sorrowfully. "Oh, pardon me, M. Germain," replied the Chourineur, becoming serious. "You do not like to see me laugh at this. Do not let us add another word. I must let all out with you, and so, perhaps, force you to shake my hand." "I have no doubt of that, for in spite of the crime of which you are accused, and of which you accuse yourself, all in you bespeaks so much courage and frankness that I am convinced you are charged unjustly. Strong suspicions may exist, but I am sure that is all." "Oh, as to that you are mistaken, M. Germain," said the Chourineur, hastily, "on my word as a man, and as true as I have a protector." The Chourineur took off his cap. "Who is more than all the world to me. I robbed at night by forcing the shutter, and was caught in the fact and deprived of all I was endeavouring to carry off." "But hunger, pushed you to such an extremity." "Hunger! I had 120 francs when they apprehended me, the remains of a note of 1,000 francs, without including the protector I have mentioned to you, who, by the way, does not know that I am here, but will not let me want for anything. Since, however, I have mentioned him to you, you must suppose I am in earnest, for you must know that he is a man to go on your knees before. So I must tell you, too, that the shower of blows which I drummed on the Skeleton's sconce was a sketch after his style, copied from nature. The idea of the robbery was on his account, and, in fact, if you were not strangled by the Skeleton, it is through him." "But this protector—" "Is yours also." "Mine?" "Yes, M. Rodolph protects you. When I say monsieur, I should say monseigneur, for he is at least a prince; but I have a habit of calling him M. Rodolph, which he permits me to do." "You are under some mistake," said Germain, more and more surprised. "I do not know the prince." "Yes, but he knows you. You don't believe it? Well, that's possible, for that's his way. He knows that there is some worthy fellow in trouble, and then, in an instant, the good fellow is comforted, and without being seen or known, he is at work, and kindness falls from the skies, like a tile from a house on your head. So patience, and one day or other you will have your tile." "Really, what you say amazes me." "And you'll have a great deal more to amaze you yet. To return to my protector. Some time ago, after a service which he persisted I had done him, he procured me a splendid position,
I need not say where, or any more about it, for it would be a long tale to tell. Well, he sends me to Marseilles to embark and go to a capital appointment in Algeria. I left Paris as happy as a child, but all of a sudden a change comes over me." "That was singular." "Why, you must know that once separated from Monsieur Rodolph I was uneasy, disturbed, as fidgety as a dog who has lost his master. It was very stupid, but so are dogs, sometimes, but that does not prevent them from being at least attached, and as well mindful of the nice bits given them as of the thumps and kicks they have had, and Monsieur Rodolph had given me many nice bits, and, in truth, Monsieur Rodolph is everything to me. From being a riotous, dare-devil, good-for-nothing blackguard, he made an honest man of me by only saying 2 words, just for all the world, like magic." "What were the words he said?" "He said I had still heart and honour, although I have been at the galleys, not for having stolen it, it's true. Oh, never that! But what perhaps is worse, for having killed. Yes," said the Chourineur, in a gloomy tone, "killed, in a moment of passion, because formerly growing up like a brute beast, or rather as a vagabond, without father or mother, and left abandoned in the streets of Paris, I knew neither God nor devil, neither good nor evil. Sometimes the blood mounted to my eyes, and I saw red, and if I had a knife in my hands I slashed and hacked. I was a real savage, a beast, and only lived amongst thieves and scoundrels. I was in the mud, and in the mud I lived as well as I could. But when Monsieur Rodolph said to me that since, in spite of the contempt of all the world and my misery, instead of plundering like others I had preferred working as long as I could, and for what I could, that showed I had still heart and honour. Thunder! You see these 2 words had the same effect on me as if I had been seized by the hair of my head and lifted 1,000 feet into the air above the vermin with whom I dwelt, and showed me the filth in which my life was spent. So I said, 'Thank ye, I've had enough of this.' Then my heart beat with something else besides anger, and I took an oath to myself always to preserve that honour which M. Rodolph spoke of. You see, M. Germain, that when M. Rodolph told me so kindly that I was not so bad as I believed myself to be, that encouraged me, and, thanks to him, I became better than I had been." When he heard this language, Germain comprehended less and less how the Chourineur had committed the robbery of which he accused himself. "No," he said to himself, "it is impossible. The man who was so exalted at the 2 words honour and heart could not have committed the robbery of which he talks with so much self-complacency." The Chourineur continued, without remarking the astonishment of Germain. "To say the truth, what made me be like a dog to his master to M. Rodolph was that he raised me in my own opinion. Before I knew him I never felt but on my skin, but he moved me inwardly, and to the bottom of my heart. Once away from him and the place he inhabited, I felt like a body without a soul. In proportion, as I proceeded farther, I said to myself, 'He leads such a strange life, mixes with such scamps, I can answer for that he risks his body 20 times a day, and under some such circumstances I may be his dog and defend my master, for I am strong in the jaws.' But then he said to me, 'My good fellow, you must become useful to others, therefore go where you can be serviceable.' I was very near replying, 'I have no one to serve but you, M. Rodolph,' but I daren't. He said to me, 'Go,' and I went, and I have gone as far as I could; but, thunder! when I ought to have gone on board the ship, left France, and put the sea between M. Rodolph and myself, I had not the courage. He had desired his correspondent to give me a great lump of money when I sailed, so I went to the gentleman and said to him, 'Sir, I can't do it. I'd rather do anything, so please to give me enough to pay my journey on foot. I have good legs, and I will return to Paris, for I cannot leave France. M. Rodolph will be angry, and perhaps refuse to see me, that's possible; but I shall see him, know where he is, and if he goes on as usual, sooner or later I may, perhaps, arrive in time to come between him and a stab with a knife, and then I really cannot go so far away from him. Something I cannot account for attracts me to his side. Well, they gave me sufficient to pay my way, and I reached Paris. Then I really was frightened. What could I say to M. Rodolph to excuse myself? But after all, he would not eat me up, so I went to find his friend, a tall, bald-headed man, but a right sort of fellow as ever broke bread. When I saw M. Murphy, I said, now my fate will be decided, and my throat was dry, and my heart beat such a pace. I expected to catch it pretty handsomely, but what d'ye think? Why, the worthy gentleman received me just as if we had only parted the previous evening, and told me that M. Rodolph, instead of being angry, wished to see me as soon as possible. Well, so I went at once to my protector, him with such a stout fist and a good heart. And when I was face to face with him who is as terrible as a lion and as gentle as a child, he who is a prince, and yet puts on a blouse like me, and once on a time, I bless the day or night rather, laid on me such a shower of blows that I saw nothing but fire, why, Monsieur Germain, when I reflected on all the agreeable qualities he is master of, I felt completely overcome, and I snivelled like a woman. Well, instead of laughing at me, for I must be a rum-looking lot when I pipe my eye, M. Rodolph said to me seriously, "Here you are back again, my good fellow, eh?" "Yes, M. Rodolph, and pray excuse me if I have done wrong, but I could not help it." "Give me some corner in your courtyard, give me a crust and a glass, or let me earn it here, that's all I ask, and pray don't be angry with me for coming back." "So far from it, my man, you have come back just in time to do me a service." "I, M. Rodolph? Is that possible? Well, there must have been something above, for if not, how could I explain how it was I must come back here at the very moment when you wanted me? What can I do for you, M. Rodolph?" "An honest, worthy young man, in whom I take the interest I should do in a son, has been unjustly accused of robbery, and is a prisoner in La Force. His name is Germain. He is of a gentle, quiet disposition. The wretches with whom he is confined have conceived a great aversion for him, and he is in great danger. You unfortunately have known what a prison life is, and a great many prisoners. Could not you, in case there may be any of your old companions in La Force, we will find that out, go and see them, and by promises of money, which shall be duly performed, induce them to protect this unfortunate young man?" "But who can this generous and unknown man be, who takes so much interest in my fate?" asked Germain, more and more surprised. "You will learn, perhaps, hereafter. As for me, I do not know. To return to my conversation with M. Rodolph. Whilst he was speaking to me there came an idea into my head, so curious, so whimsical, that I could not forbear laughing outright before him. 'What is it, my lad?' said he. 'Why, M. Rodolph, I laugh because I am so happy, and I am happy because I have the means of putting your Mr. Germain quite safe from any ill will on the part of the prisoners, of giving him a protector who will defend him boldly, for when once the young fellow is under the care of the man I mean, not one will dare look at him impertinently.' Very good. One of your old comrades, no doubt?" "Exactly so, M. Rodolph. He has been in La Force some days, that I know. But I must have some money. How much shall you require? A note for 1,000 francs? Here it is. Thank ye, M. Rodolph. In 2 days you will have some news." "I begin to understand, or rather, I'm afraid to understand," exclaimed Germain. "To come and protect me in this prison you have, perhaps, committed a robbery? Oh, what remorse will beset all my life!" "Hold hard. M. Rodolph had said I had heart and honour. These words are my law, you must know. And he may still say it to me, for if I am no better than I was before, at least I am no worse." "But this robbery, if you have not committed it, why are you here?" "Listen. There is a capital joke with my 1,000 francs. I bought myself a black wig, shaved my whiskers, put on blue spectacles, bent my head on one side, and made up my back as if it were humped, and then went in search of 2 apartments to let, on the ground floor, in a bustling part of the city. I found what I looked for in the Rue de Provence, and paid a month in advance, under the name of M. Grégoire. Next day I went to the Temple to buy furniture for my 2 rooms, with my black wig, my hump, and blue glasses, so that I might be easily recognised. Well, I sent the goods to the Rue de Provence, and, moreover, 6 silver spoons, which I bought in the Boulevard St. Denis, still disguised with my hump. I returned them to arrange all my affairs in my residence. I told the porter I should not sleep there until the following night, and took away my key. The windows of the 2 rooms were closed with strong shutters. Before I went away I had purposely left one with the bolt undrawn. The night came, and I put off my wig, my spectacles, my hump, and the clothes in which I had made my purchases and hired my apartments, putting this suit in a portmanteau, which I forwarded to Monsieur Murphy, Monsieur Rodolph's friend, begging him to take care of it for me. I then bought this blouse and the blue cotton cap and a bar of iron 2 feet long. And at 1 o'clock in the morning I went into the Rue de Provence, where I lurked about before my lodging, awaiting the moment when the patrol would pass and prevent my robbing myself, committing a burglary on my own premises, in order to be caught and apprehended." And the Chourineur burst into a fit of hearty laughter. "I begin to understand," cried Germain. "But I was nearly getting in a fix, for no patrol passed. I might have robbed myself 20 times with the greatest ease and safety. At last, about 2 o'clock in the morning, I heard the tread of the soldier boys, and then I pushed open the window, jumped into the room, pocketed the silver spoons and some other trifles. Fortunately the lively patrol had heard the smash of the windows, and just as I leaped out of the window they laid hands upon me. They knocked at the door, which the porter opened. They sent for the sergeant of police, who came. The porter told him that the 2 rooms had been hired that morning by a hump-backed gentleman, with black hair and blue spectacles, whose name was Grégoire. I had the thick head of hair which you now see, and my eyes were as wide open as a hare's on the watch, was as upright as a Russian sentinel, and could not be taken for a humped-backed gentleman, with blue glasses and black hair. I confessed all, and was conducted to the station, and from the station to this prison, where I arrived in the nick of time to snatch from the clutch of the Skeleton the young man of whom M. Rodolph had said to me, 'I am interested in him as much as if he were my own son.'" "What do I not owe you for such devotion?" "Not to me. You owe it to M. Rodolph." "But whence arises his interest in me?" "That is for him to tell you, or perhaps he will not tell you, for he very often chooses to do good, and if you ask him why, he will not let you know." "M. Rodolph, then, knows you are here?" "I'm not such a fool as to tell him my plans. Perhaps he would not have consented to my whim, and really, I must say it was capital." "But what risks you have run, indeed still run!" "Oh, what risk? I might not have been brought to La Force, that was the worst risk. But I relied on M. Rodolph's interest to have my prison changed, so that I might have got to you." "But at your trial?" "Well, I shall beg M. Murphy to send me the portmanteau. Before the judge I shall appear in my black wig, blue spectacles, and hump, and shall be again M. Grégoire for the porter who let me the chambers and the tradespeople who sold me the goods. So much for the robbery. If they wish to see the thief again, I'll put off my suit, and then it will be as clear as daylight that the robber and the robbed together only make a total of the Chourineur and no more." "And what the devil would you expect when it is proved that I robbed myself?" "Why, indeed," said Germain, more assured; "but since you take so much interest in me, why did you not speak to me when you first came into the prison?" "I knew instantly of the scheme against you by the prisoners, and I might have denounced them before Pique Vinaigre began or ended his story; but to denounce such ruffians did not suit my ideas. I preferred trusting only to my fist in order to snatch you from the clutch of the Skeleton. And when I saw that scoundrel, I said to myself, 'This is a fine opportunity for putting in practice that shower of blows to which I owe the honour of M. Rodolph's acquaintance.'" "But if all the prisoners had taken part against you alone, what could you have done?" "Why, then, I should have shrieked like an eagle, and called lustily for help. But I preferred having my little affair all to myself, that I might be able to say to M. Rodolph, I was all alone in the matter. I have defended and will defend your friend. Be easy on that subject." At this moment the turnkey suddenly returned to the apartment. "Monsieur Germain, go to the governor; he wishes to speak to you immediately. And you, Chourineur, go down into the Fosse aux Lions; you are to be prévôt if you like, for you have all the qualifications for that duty, and the prisoners will not joke with a man of your sort." "It is all the same to me. I'd as soon be captain as private." "Will you refuse my hand now?" said Germain, cordially. "Ma foi, no, M. Germain. I'll shake hands with all my heart."
"We shall see one another again, for I am now under your protection. I shall have nothing more to fear, and shall, therefore, come down every day from my cell into the yard."
"Make yourself quite easy on that score. But now I think of it, write a line to M. Rodolph, who will then no longer be uneasy about you, and will also learn that I am here for a good reason, for if he were to hear that I had committed a robbery and did not know all the real facts, thunder! That would not do by any means."
"Make your mind easy. I will write this very evening to my unknown protector. Once more, good bye, and thanks most heartily, my worthy friend."
"Good bye, M. Germain. I must return to those scoundrels, and I'll make them go right. If not, let them look out for squalls."
"When I reflect that it is on my account that you must remain some time longer with these wretches—"
"What consequence is that? There is no fear of their turning on me."
And the Chourineur followed the turnkey. Germain went to the governor. What was his surprise to find Rigolette there, pale, agitated, and her eyes bathed in tears, and yet smiling through her tears, her countenance expressing unutterable happiness.
"I have good news for you, sir,"
said the governor to Germain.
"Justice has declared that no prosecution can be instituted against you; and, in consequence of the withdrawing of this, and explanations that have taken place, I have received an order to set you at liberty immediately."
"Sir, what do you say? Can it be possible?" Rigolette tried to speak, but her extreme emotion prevented her, and she could only make an affirmative sign to Germain with her head, and clasp her hands.
"Mademoiselle arrived a few minutes after I had received the order to set you at liberty," added the governor. "A very powerful letter of recommendation which she brought to me informed me of the touching devotion she had shown to you in prison; and it is with extreme pleasure that I sent for you, certain that you will be very happy to offer your arm to mademoiselle and lead her hence."
"A dream! It must be a dream!" said Germain. "Ah, sir, how can I thank you? Excuse my astonishment, joy prevents me from thanking you as I ought." "And I, too, M. Germain, I cannot find a word to say," said Rigolette. "Only imagine my delight when I left you on finding the friend of M. Rodolph, who was waiting for me."
"Again M. Rodolph!" exclaimed Germain, astonished.
"Yes, and M. Murphy said to me, 'Germain is free; here is a letter for the governor of the prison. When you arrive there he will have received the order for Germain's release, and you may take him away with you.' I could not believe what I heard, and yet it was true. Well, as quick as possible I took a hackney coach and came here. It is waiting for us at the gate." We will not attempt to paint the delight of the two lovers when they quitted La Force, and the evening they passed together in Rigolette's small apartment, which Germain quitted at 11 o'clock to go to a humble furnished room. CHAPTR XII. End of The Mysteries of Paris, Volume 5, by Eugène Sue. Recorded by Céline Major.